Chapter 281, Corpse Veins. Nathan sheathed his short sword and watched intently as the Mist Village shinobi stepped out of the forest, his face set in a grim mask. Nathan could immediately tell this newcomer was on a different level from the other Mist ninjas he'd already dispatched. Dressed in a white kimono, with his hair tied into two buns, heavy black eyeshadow, and the two red dots between his brows, the man bore every mark of the infamous Kaguya clan. The Kaguyas, a storied bloodline in the mist-hidden village, possess a rare Kekkei Genkai called the corpse bone vein. This ability lets them manipulate their own skeletal structure at will, turning their bodies into living weapons. As a result, few shinobi match their raw physical power. Sensing Nathan's appraisal, the Kaguya shinobi, Morinosuke, met his gaze. When Morinosuke caught sight of Nathan's Sharingan, his eyes gleamed with savage excitement. Nathan thought to himself, this clan really is twisted. It wasn't that he was underestimating Morinosuke. The Kaguyas had long been notorious for their brutality. They not only excelled in battle, they thrived on bloodshed, finding perverse joy in violence and killing. And now, Nathan knew he faced one of their finest. Nathan faced the Kaguya clan shinobi before him, a warrior driven solely by his thirst for blood. Clad in the markings of the Uchiha and wielding the dreaded Sharingan, he epitomized the clan's ruthless reputation. Excellent, excellent, Kaguya Morinosuke muttered under his breath, his eyes glinting unnaturally. Then, without warning, he threw back his head and laughed, a wild, unhinged bark that echoed through the clearing. But Nathan's expression never wavered. He stood perfectly still, meeting Morinosuke's gaze without flinching. Moments later, the man's laughter cut off just as abruptly as it had begun. His manic grin faded, replaced by a calculating calm. Nathan recognized the tactic instantly. The Kaguya were infamous not only for their savagery, but also for their cunning. Years of constant warfare had sharpened both their instincts and their intellect. This display of madness was nothing more than bait, an attempt to draw Nathan into a hasty attack. With his bluff exposed and his prey unprovoked, Morinosuke fell silent. The ruse had failed. Kaguya Morinosuke's eyes turned ice cold as he sneered, "Ha! I hope you don't break as easily as they did." Nathan glanced over his shoulder at the carnage in the distance. Two Konoha special jonin lay sprawled on the ground, their bones crushed, bodies grotesquely twisted, obvious victims of Kaguya's brutal skill. And yet, Nathan felt nothing but detachment. He'd never known those shinobi. They were collateral in this deadly game. In war, both sides bleed, both sides lose. Fate and strength decide who falls, and these two simply hadn't been strong enough. "Die!" Kaguya hissed. Without hesitation, he flexed his fingers until each joint seemed to crack. Then, with terrifying speed, he unleashed his forbidden physical art. Corpse bone vein, 10-finger piercing barrage. Needles of bone explosively sprouted from his knuckles and shot toward Nathan, each one honed to a perfect lethal point. In the next instant, Kaguya Morinosuke's 10-finger bone projectiles sliced through the air like deadly bullets, each one aimed for Nathan's vitals. With a blur of motion, Nathan's pupils constricted, and his 3 Magatama Sharingan flared to life. Time seemed to slow as those bone shards crawled toward him. Nathan didn't hesitate. He spun his short sword in a seamless dance, parrying each missile with pinpoint precision. Though everything unfolded in what felt like an eternity, it actually took but a heartbeat. Frustration flashed in Morinosuke's eyes as he watched his attack fizzle under Nathan's defense. Undeterred, he flexed his 10 fingers again, unleashing a fresh volley of bone missiles in hopes of overwhelming his opponent. But Nathan's heightened perception, armed with that 3 Magatama Sharingan, and his mastery of level 6, nearly level 7 swordsmanship, proved unbreakable. Each incoming shard met the edge of his blade and shattered harmlessly, leaving Morinosuke's assault in ruins. Nathan had spent their previous encounters studying Kaguya Morinosuke's every move, so when the enemy fired off another volley of fingerbone missiles, Nathan was ready. He slipped between the projectiles, and in that split second of motion, their eyes met. Seizing the moment, Nathan activated his Sharingan Genjutsu. A wave of psychic force erupted, no Manjikyo blessing this time, yet still more powerful than any before. Kaguya's face went slack and his body froze. Now, Nathan thought, lunging forward. He thrust his dagger straight for Kaguya's heart. But at the crucial instant, Kaguya's life-or-death instincts kicked in. The illusion shattered, and even as Nathan's blade came within inches of his chest, Kaguya snapped his arm up and caught the dagger's hilt in a sudden, desperate grip. Nathan swung his dagger in a swift arc, the blade slicing through the air with a sharp swish. Pain flared in his palm as the steel bit into flesh, drawing a thin line of bright red blood. He gritted his teeth and forced the blade forward anyway. The dagger, its snowy white surface kissed by scarlet, tore through his hand and drove toward Kaguya Morinosuke's heart. But Kaguya was ready. He planted a steady palm against Nathan's blade, twisting his torso aside at the last second. The dagger slid past his sternum and buried itself only shallowly in the breastplate beneath his skin, its tip halted by hard metal. Nathan felt the resistance instantly. His weapon could go no farther. Kaguya's dark eyes gleamed with triumph as he stepped in close. A cruel grin split his lips, revealing sharp, predatory teeth. "Little devil," he hissed, "you've drawn blood on me." With that, he seized Nathan's dagger in his free hand. Before Nathan could react, Kaguya's forearm split open, and sinister bone-like spurs shot through the rent flesh. They hissed through the air and slammed into Nathan's side, hot pain exploding across his ribs. Staggering, Nathan realized too late that his own attack had given Kaguya the opening he needed. Nathan's heart sank. He'd misjudged his distance, and now the dagger was locked so tightly against his blade that he couldn't draw his sword. With no better option, he eased his grip, stamped his feet against the ground, and shot backward in a powerful retreat. Seeing Nathan pull away, Kaguya Morinosuke flung the dagger aside. His 10 fingers curled. A sickening crack sounded as jagged shards of bone erupted from his knuckles. With inhuman speed, he launched them like deadly arrows. Nathan's Sharingan snapped open, the world slowing to track each razor-sharp fragment. He reached into the pouch at his waist, whipped out a kunai, and began spinning it in wide arcs, deflecting every bone shard that came his way. A low, amused chuckle rolled from Kaguya's throat. "Not bad for a Sharingan user," he taunted, "but I hope you're ready to really fight." With that, he tore off the rest of his clothing. Veins pulsed at his temples as the power of the corpse bone veins surged forth. Pure white spikes burst from his arms, shoulders, and back, transforming him in an instant into a nightmarish creature bristling with bone. Nathan steadied his breath, blade and kunai at the ready. Whatever Kaguya had become, Nathan would not go down without a fight. This is the corpse bone veins' power. By controlling osteoblasts and osteoclasts, it can instantly generate vast quantities of ultra-dense bone, granting impenetrable defense and crafting the mightiest of spears. Chapter 282 Drink. Kaguya Morinosuke, now fully transformed into a hulking, spiked hedgehog, bellowed as he lunged forward. With a wild grin splitting his face, he drew a jagged bone knife from his left arm and hefted it in his right. He let out a ferocious laugh and planted his cloven feet like a charging tank, barreling straight at Nathan. Without hesitation, Nathan snapped his kunai back into his pouch, then dropped into a hand seal sequence at lightning speed. As the seals cracked in the air, he unleashed fire release, great fireball technique. A blazing orb, 2 to 3 meters across, burst from Nathan's mouth. It hurtled toward Kaguya Morinosuke, scorching the air around it. The hedgehog demon snarled, feeling the heat roll off the inferno, and twisted aside at the last moment to avoid being engulfed. Boom! The fireball slammed into a massive tree behind him, incinerating it down to charcoal. Roaring flames leapt outward, turning the clearing into a hellish sea of fire. Nathan braced himself as the heat pressed in, prepared for whatever Kaguya Morinosuke would do next. Kaguya Morinosuke prided himself on his ferocity in battle, but as he watched Nathan gather chakra for that next fire jutsu, even he couldn't suppress a flicker of unease. The bony spurs protruding from his arms and shoulders made him nearly impervious to close-quarters strikes, and strong enough to shrug off minor ninjutsu. But against that blazing inferno Nathan had just unleashed, they were hopelessly inadequate. Determined not to be outmaneuvered, Kaguya lunged forward, bone knife raised, aiming to close the gap and catch Nathan mid-cast. Yet no sooner had he taken 2 strides than another fireball exploded from Nathan's palm. Too fast! Kaguya barely managed to roll aside, flames scorching the earth where he'd stood. And that was just the opening. For the next several minutes, Nathan's fire jutsu rained down in relentless succession, each blast forcing Kaguya to sprint backward, arms braced in futile defense. "Damn him," Kaguya muttered, grit grinding in his teeth. Mud clung to his boots, sweat stung his eyes, but there was no time for anger, only for dodging. If he didn't keep moving, he'd be reduced to ashes. Moments ago, Nathan had loosened his guard, just enough for Kaguya Morinosuke to spot an opening. But Nathan's Sharingan reacted instantly, and he nearly blasted a fireball straight into Kaguya's face. The sudden attack shook Kaguya, forcing him to tread carefully. Yet he remained calm. While Nathan burned through chakra with one jutsu after another, Kaguya was only dodging, which sapped his reserves much more slowly. He knew this standoff couldn't last forever. Eventually Nathan would exhaust himself or shift tactics, and that's when Kaguya would strike. Still, Nathan had his own reasons for prolonging the exchange. First, he needed time to devise a countermeasure. Kaguya's iron resolve and decades of battlefield experience made him a fearsome opponent, especially in close quarters, where he thrived. As a specialist in hand-to-hand combat, Kaguya was exactly the kind of rival Nathan had to outthink, not just outfight. So Nathan continued to harry him, buying precious seconds to formulate the plan that might finally turn the tide. Nathan narrowed his focus, activating his Sharingan to scrutinize every twitch and habit of his opponent. Each blink, each shift of weight, everything was being logged for the decisive clash to come. Chakra consumption? Not a problem. After his recent breakthrough, his reserves now peaked at nearly 60,000 points. Casting a fire release, high fireball jutsu, or any other standard ninjutsu wouldn't even dent that. Besides, Kirigakure was teaming with Chunin. If he ever dipped too low, he could slip away and siphon chakra from them. His chakra absorption technique might have stalled in growth, but at level 5, it still leached 1,000 chakra points per second from a target, converting 90% straight into his own stores. Capturing a lone Chunin alive, even amid the chaos of battle, was well within his abilities. Nathan had no intention of running out of chakra. Still, he couldn't afford to linger. 2 more Kirigakure Jonin were already turning their heads toward the fight. They weren't Kaguya clan shinobi, and they wouldn't join forces with Kaguya Morinosuke. Before they could intervene, Nathan needed to finish his recon and prepare for the real fight. With the 2 Konoha special Jonin occupied elsewhere, no reinforcements could reach the fray. For now. Yet both sides knew that if the battle dragged on, or if Morinosuke's allies began to falter, those Jonin would inevitably break free and intervene. Nathan understood this all too well. He could not afford any more delays. He had to decide the outcome swiftly. 2 minutes ticked by. During that time, Nathan had relied on fire release, fireball technique, and other ninjutsu to keep Kaguya Morinosuke at bay, never allowing his opponent an opening. But now, at last, Nathan let his guard down. He ceased casting any fire jutsu, withdrew his defensive chakra, and simply stood his ground. Morinosuke, taken aback, dared not advance. He'd expected the confrontation to grow more intense, not fizzle out. Was this a trap? He wondered, sweat beading on his brow. His caution only heightened Nathan's resolve. With calm precision, Nathan brought his hands together and formed the ram seal. In one fluid motion, he completed the sequence and unleashed his most trusted jutsu, shadow clone technique. In an instant, Nathan's single form split into 3 identical figures, each brimming with the same fierce determination. Now outnumbered and with no time to hesitate, Morinosuke realized the tide had turned, and the real battle was only just beginning. Kaguya Morinosuke sneered at the sight before him. Shadow clone technique? Pathetic. One of you couldn't even scratch me. Now you think bringing 2 copies will help? 3 against 1? How amusing. Nathan said nothing. He recognized the taunt for what it was, a mind game. Kaguya was testing his resolve, hoping to throw him off balance. Nathan kept his silence, gave no quarter. Frustrated by the lack of response, Kaguya dropped his mocking grin and lunged forward, bone knife arcing toward Nathan's throat. In the same instant, Nathan yanked a kunai from his tool pouch and dashed in, 2 perfect shadows trailing him like loyal hounds. Steel rang out as kunai met bone blade in a harsh, ringing clash. Nathan's feet sank into the muddy ground as he planted himself, arms burning with the effort to hold back Kaguya's deadly strike. Their blades locked, bodies pressed close in a brutal test of strength. That was all the opening Nathan needed. His two shadow clones flanked around Kaguya's sides, each thrusting a kunai straight into the gaps between his defensive bone spurs, precise, unprotected. In a heartbeat, the advantage shifted, and Kaguya Morinosuke found himself on the losing end of the trap he'd laid. But Kaguya Morinosuke only sneered, and in an instant, bone-like spikes shot from his blade, piercing the two shadow clones in their vital areas. Alarmed, the clones melted back into the shadows, retreating alongside Nathan. Before Morinosuke could press his advantage, Nathan slammed a foot into the ground, reversing his withdrawal in a heartbeat. He lunged forward, surging at Kaguya Morinosuke with renewed ferocity. Unfazed, Morinosuke met him head-on, swinging his sword in a swift, precise arc. The clash of kunai against that jagged, bone-forged blade rang out in a cascade of sharp, metallic clangs. Seizing the split-second opening, Nathan's two shadow clones darted in, joining their master's assault. In a sudden 3-to-1 onslaught, they bore down on Morinosuke, forcing the seasoned swordsman onto the defensive under their relentless pressure. Chapter 283, Action, Illusion, Sharingan. Seizing the opening created by his two synchronized shadow clones, Nathan unleashed the perfected genjutsu. Yet Kaguya Morinosuke was no novice. Having spent years battling on Uchiha-dominated frontlines, he knew precisely how to guard against Sharingan illusions, and he'd barely caught his breath after a recent hit. The instant Nathan's illusion crept into his vision, Morinosuke sprang into action. Bone spurs erupted from his limbs, twisting and interlocking until, in the blink of an eye, they formed a grotesque suit of snow-white armor that encased his entire body. Nathan halted mid-strike. He'd shattered lesser bone defenses before, but nothing like this. These weren't ordinary ribs or spikes. They were the product of Morinosuke's command over bone bud cells and osteoclasts, forged so dense and hard they rivaled steel. Neither kunai nor brute force could breach them. For the first time, Nathan found himself stymied. The living bone armor offered no seams, no obvious weak point. He tightened his grip on his blade, frustration burning in his chest. Breaking through would require more than raw strength. It would demand a new strategy. Nathan barely had a moment to breathe before Kaguya Morinosuke snapped out of the illusion and lunged back into the fight. Her sheer resolve, bordering on madness, only underscored what Nathan already suspected. She came from a clan that reveled in war. His instant Sharingan illusion hadn't been strong enough to hold her. Any more potent genjutsu would demand either extended preparation or the use of his Mangekyo Sharingan. He knew better than to hope for a long setup. She wouldn't wait around, and he couldn't risk revealing the Mangekyo with enemies lurking unseen. A prickling sensation told him someone else was spying from the shadows. He forced the thought aside, grateful he'd already created two shadow clones with chakra. Defeating Kaguya so quickly had been a stroke of luck. He couldn't count on more surprises. Steeling himself, Nathan synchronized his moves with the two clones and struck again at Kaguya Morinosuke. Steel rang against steel as the three of them pressed the attack, each clash echoing across the clearing. Ninjas of the Kaguya clan, who awaken the corpse bone veins, are devastating close combat fighters, especially in pure taijutsu. Their ability to sprout razor-sharp bone spurs anywhere on their bodies turns them into living weapons. Nathan's own physical skills may not surpass those of the highest-ranked jonin, but he's unquestionably above average. And yet, even with two shadow clones at his side, he couldn't gain the upper hand against Kaguya Morinosuke. Every time he thought he'd pushed Morinosuke back, the Kaguya shinobi struck again with ferocious counters. Were it not for the, admittedly glitchy, insight granted by Nathan's Sharingan, he might already have been seriously injured. During the exchange, Nathan witnessed firsthand the Kaguya clan's signature taijutsu forms, the Willow Dance, the Camellia Dance, the Karamatsu Dance, and both versions of the Wire Flower Dance, Man and Flower. Each technique has its own flair and tactical purpose, and Morinosuke wove them together into a relentless, lethal performance. Only someone of Nathan's skill and resilience could have endured such an onslaught. Most senior shinobi would have collapsed long before. Nathan knew that persisting with his clones would quickly drain him. His current shadow clone technique was only level 4, and while creating a clone and then reabsorbing it normally cost about 7% of the clone's chakra, that rate assumes the clone remains stationary. In a fierce battle like this, chakra consumption soars. That's why almost no shinobi deploy shadow clones in combat. At the start of the fight, Kaguya Morinosuke had taunted him. If you can't handle this on your own, do you really think 3 of you could win? Whether she meant to test him or simply doubted him, she was right in principle. If the original can't defeat an opponent, adding 2 more Odis won't help, unless you possess an extraordinary skill like Sarutobi Hiruzen did. Otherwise, using clones in battle is a thankless task. So why did Nathan press on anyway? The reason was simple. He had a unique ability of his own. Nathan watched the clock as the seconds ticked by, waiting for the moment he'd been preparing for. Over the past days, he'd painstakingly cataloged every nuance of Kaguya Morinosuke's fighting style. Now, flanked by his 2 shadow clones, he began to steer Morinosuke's choices, coaxing him into patterns the trio could predict. Time slowed. Then, spotting Nathan's feint, Morinosuke unleashed his signature move, Corpse Vein, Willow Dance. In an instant, his bones seemed to dissolve. He flowed forward like a drifting willow seed, effortlessly evading Nathan's strike. Before Nathan or his clones could recover, Morinosuke countered with a flurry of bone-forged blades, precise, economical motions that shattered their coordinated rhythm. Nathan froze for a heartbeat. Something was off. One of his shadows reacted ever so slightly late, just enough for Morinosuke to notice. Seizing the rare opening, Morinosuke followed through, swinging a serrated bone knife in a brutal arc toward Nathan's midsection. Sensing the threat, Nathan dove aside, the knife grazing empty air. His heart pounded, but he was still in the fight. Kaguya Morinosuke pressed his assault without mercy, his body flowing like living water. In a blur of motion, he lashed out 4 or 5 times in rapid succession, and for a heartbeat, Nathan's life hung by a thread. 2 shadow clones of Nathan rushed in to shield him, but they were too late. Morinosuke's uncanny instincts seized the fleeting chance. With a single, decisive strike, he killed the leading clone before the others could close in. Bang! A cloud of purple chakra smoke billowed outward, and then evaporated. Morinosuke opened his eyes, a flicker of disappointment crossing his features. Not the real body, he murmured. At that moment, Nathan, who had sprinted to intervene, stopped dead in his tracks, standing directly in Morinosuke's line of sight. A chill ran through Morinosuke as he recognized the telltale shimmer of a genjutsu activating behind his eyelids. "Genjutsu Sharingan," he growled. "Trap!" Realization hit him. The clone's delayed reaction hadn't been clumsiness, but a ruse designed to pull him under the illusion. Sensing the technique's insidious pull on his mind, Morinosuke shut his eyes instantly, ready to battle the illusion for control. At that very moment, the countless bone spurs cloaking his body cracked and reformed. Some fused into a grotesque suit of armor around his vital organs, while others erupted into meter-long spikes designed to keep Nathan at bay. He had absolute faith in the strength of this living plating. After all, Nathan had never put a dent in it before. But he also knew his opponent wouldn't have engineered this encounter on a whim. With a single, fluid motion, he reinforced the bone armor with an additional layer of plating, his reflexes betraying an uncanny awareness of the fight. Yet could all these defenses truly halt Nathan? Of course not. Every step of this plan had been meticulously prepared to grant him one clear advantage: time. And as the final seconds ticked away, he was already calling on the power of his illusion Sharingan. No wall of bone, no matter how formidable, could stand against him now. Chapter 284, The Final Kill. A sudden, sharp whistle sliced through the tension-filled air. At the edge of the clearing, Nathan raised his right hand, chakra spiraling into a massive, ethereal shuriken. This was no ordinary weapon. It was the forbidden S-rank technique, wind release, tailed spiral shuriken. As it began to spin, the shuriken tore at the very air around it, its horrifying power humming with violence. Every shinobi in the vicinity, whether Konoha Chunin, Kirigakure Jonin, or the 3 famed sword-wielders, turned in unison to witness the display. A palpable wave of fear rippled outward, and most fighters instinctively took a step back, unwilling to risk a stray gust from the weapon's whirlwind. Only the trio of swordsmen and 2 hardened Kirigakure Jonin stood their ground, eyes locked on the advancing threat. Without hesitation, Nathan's shadow clone launched himself forward, determined to prevent any chance of Kaguya Morinosuke escaping. The distance between them closed in an instant, and the clone hurtled into a clash of blades and chakra at the heart of the battlefield, where only a single, final blow would decide the outcome. Nathan's arrival unleashed an overwhelming tide of menace that washed over Kaguya Morinosuke. The sudden onslaught of danger ripped him free from the Sharingan Genjutsu, but it was already too late. In the split second he blinked back to reality, Nathan's shadow clone had locked its eyes on him, fingers crackling as they shaped a colossal, wind-laced shuriken. "No!" Morinosuke howled, bracing himself as his body sprouted hideous bone spines, but the clone pressed on without hesitation. With a practiced flick, he unleashed wind style, Rasen Shuriken. The moment it struck, Morinosuke's bony armor turned to dust, eroded by the technique's corrosive edge. Panicking but desperate to survive, he summoned the power of his corpse vein, flooding his frame with cursed chakra to thicken that skeletal shield. Yet wind style, Rasen Shuriken, was more than a blunt projectile. It condensed wind chakra into billions of microscopic needles, each one a venomous probe that gnawed relentlessly at bone and flesh. Morinosuke's scream echoed through the air, cut tragically short as the microscopic needles carved him from the inside out. In an instant, the battlefield fell silent, leaving only the faintest whisper of scattering dust. Nathan unleashed his wind-style Rasen Shuriken with blistering rotational force, infusing it with 130 trillion microscopic chakra blades. Though Kaguya Morinosuke's bone armor was renowned for its incredible density and toughness, at a cellular level it was riddled with tiny gaps, just enough for Nathan's deadly shards to slip through. In an instant, the chakra blades tore between the armor's fissures and drilled into Morinosuke's flesh, shredding cells from the inside out. The whirlwind spun him skyward, and before he could react, the Rasen Shuriken detonated in a massive, roiling sphere of energy. Within that blistering orb, the countless chakra needles hammered at his body, wreaking havoc on every fiber of muscle and bone. A tortured scream tore from Kaguya Morinosuke's throat, echoing across the battlefield, a chilling testament to the Rasen Shuriken's unrivaled lethality. After 10 slow breaths, the energy sphere finally fizzled out. Kaguya Morinosuke collapsed to the ground, utterly spent, and lay motionless. At that moment, Nathan's shadow clone, already undone by the lingering force of the wind-style, Rasen Shuriken, dissipated, and Nathan himself flickered into existence at Morinosuke's side. Drawing on his mastery of medical ninjutsu, Nathan quickly examined the wounded shinobi. The countless chakra needles had ripped through Morinosuke's body at the cellular level. He could barely breathe, let alone move or channel chakra. The meridians themselves were shredded, circulation impossible. Even if Nathan chose mercy, Morinosuke would be little more than a living corpse from now on. But Nathan had no intention of sparing an enemy. Not even a sliver of chance was worth the risk. "Enemies don't get second chances," he murmured, his voice low and resolute. He drew a kunai, and with a single fluid motion, sent it spinning through the air, an unerring final judgment. Whoosh! The kunai slid home with a sharp hiss of metal on flesh, lodging cleanly in Kaguya Morinosuke's heart and draining away his last thread of life. Nathan exhaled, a wave of relief coursing through him as he watched his adversary collapse. From the outside, the kill had looked almost effortless, but it had taken everything he had. From the opening lull to gather intelligence, to the meticulous paralysis tactics to divert and delay, each step had demanded careful planning and sheer willpower. Only because Nathan had laid the groundwork beforehand did his shadow clone spot the perfect opening to unleash that lethal strike. Without all that preparation, his level 1 wind-style Rain Shuriken would never have found its target. The moment he'd identified his foe as a Kaguya clan ninja, recognizing those telltale corrupted chakra veins and admiring the man's seasoned combat skills, Nathan knew there were only 2 ways to secure victory. The first was brute force, tapping into his Mangekyo Sharingan to obliterate the enemy in a single, overwhelming assault. The second, more subtle route would test every ounce of his cunning, and that was the path he'd chosen from the start. Nathan weighed his options. He could wait for a perfect opening to strike with the forbidden S-rank wind style, Rasen Shuriken, one blow, one kill, or play it safe with a less decisive move. The choice was clear. He would go for the kill. Over the next hours, he laid out every detail of his plan. A small mishap threatened to derail him. Using his Sharingan, he caught Kaguya Morinosuke in a genjutsu trap, but his two shadow clones were poorly positioned, and he hadn't fully prepared the Rasen Shuriken. Realizing that forcing the technique then would only alert Morinosuke, Nathan held back and let the chance slip. In retrospect, that restraint paid off. He regrouped, perfected his setup, and finally carved out an ideal window to end it once and for all. Ignoring the mix of excitement, shock, and fear in the onlooker's eyes, Nathan turned his attention away from Morinosuke and walked to the spot where the dagger lay embedded in the earth. He knelt, plucked it free, and rose. The instant the hilt touched his palm, his entire presence shifted, icy, focused, and unbreakable. Nathan moved faster than anyone could follow. With a blur of motion, he closed in on the nearest Kirigakure Chunin and drove his short blade into the shinobi's lower abdomen. The man gasped but did not fall at once. Nathan withdrew the dagger, his fingers weaving an intricate hand seal. In the next heartbeat, he clamped a palm to the wounded Chunin's throat, and a horrifying vacuum ripped through the air. Streams of chakra gushed from the shinobi's body, funneled through Nathan's palm, and flooded into him. Within seconds, the Chunin's life force was extinguished. His body went limp as Nathan released him and hurtled on to the next opponent. From a short distance away, two Kirigakure Jonin realized what had just occurred. They understood too late that Nathan's true power wasn't merely skill with a blade, but the ability to drain and absorb chakra from his victims. If he refilled his reserves in this way, no one could stand against him. Abandoning their own skirmishes, the two Jonin charged toward Nathan, determined to cut him down before he could grow even stronger. Today, they resolved they would put an end to this terrifying force once and for all. Chapter 285. Testing Nathan had unquestionably expended a vast amount of chakra trying to finish Kaguya Morinosuke. Each of his shadow clones siphoned energy at an alarming rate. Yet as they dissolved one after another, that chakra flowed back into his main reserves. Now he stood with over 20,000 chakra points at his disposal, well below his 60,000 peak, but still far surpassing even the strongest Jonin. There was no rush to replenish. His strategy was clear: draw out the two remaining Kirigakure Jonin. Across the battlefield, their Chunin were crumbling. In his confrontation with Kaguya Morinosuke alone, Nathan had cut down 12 of Kirigakure's special Jonin, nearly half their elite force. Despite that loss, the enemy still held a slight numerical edge, and they hadn't come out unscathed. One special Jonin lay near death from Raiga Kuroki's lightning, and Kaguya Morinosuke herself had slain two more. Now, with his chakra reserves sufficiently restored and the enemy commanders poised to strike, Nathan prepared for the next phase of his plan. By now, fewer than 5 of Konoha's special Jonin remain alive. Several were surrounded and cut down by Kirigakure's elite. Yet 3 of the survivors must be detached just to stall the 2 Mist Village Jonin, leaving no one free to reinforce the Chunin. Kirigakure ruthlessly exploits its numerical advantage, pressing their assault on Konoha's lower ranks. In the precious minutes Nathan spent locked in combat with Kaguya Morinosuke, nearly a third of Konoha's Chunin had already fallen. If the front collapses here, it will throw every other Jonin skirmish into chaos. So Nathan makes a hard decision. He must lure the 2 Mist Jonin away from the Chunin lines. Only by drawing their focus onto himself can he free Konoha's special Jonin to return and relieve the underpowered Chunin. It won't turn the tide completely, but it's far better than leaving those young shinobi to fight alone. True to form, the 2 Mist Jonin move with ruthless efficiency. After dispatching their current opponents, they seize a group of Mist Village Chunin, using them to replenish their chakra reserves. Then, with renewed power, they surge straight toward Nathan, intent on crushing him before he can reach the Chunin battlefield. Nathan's initial objective was complete. Now, he only had 2 more targets to deal with, and he intended to finish them quickly. With that in mind, he abandoned his assault on the Mist Village Chunin and pivoted toward the pair of Jonin standing nearby. Compared to Kaguya Morinosuke, these 2 were only slightly above average Jonin, stronger than ordinary shinobi, yes, but but nowhere near true elite level. Confident in his advantage, Nathan dashed forward without hesitation. The two Mist Village Jonin exchanged alarmed glances as they realized they'd been baited. The trap was sprung, and there was no turning back now. Gritting their teeth, they braced themselves for his attack. Seeing their dismay, Nathan allowed a faint, assured smile to slip across his face, just as he'd planned. Reaching into his tool pouch, he drew out 3 sleek kunai. His Sharingan flickered to life, the scarlet eyes instantly tracing and predicting every micro-movement of his adversaries. With calm precision, he whipped his arm forward, sending the kunai slicing through the air. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Each blade hummed with lethal intent as it streaked toward the two Jonin, their fates sealed by Nathan's unerring aim and the power of the Sharingan. Nathan watched as the two mist-hidden Jonin leapt aside, then abruptly shifted direction. Boom, boom, boom. 3 kunai thudded into the trunks of nearby trees, kicking up wood chips. The Jonin froze, exchanging uneasy glances. Had they not made that split-second correction, one of those blades would have found its mark. Perched only a dozen feet away in the dense canopy, Nathan allowed himself the barest hint of disappointment. He'd known from the start that 3 kunai wouldn't fell Jonin warriors. At best, he might embarrass them. His real aim was to test their reflexes, to draw out their pattern, so he could craft his next move. A smirk flickered across his face as he flipped the silver dagger in his hand. Without warning, Nathan dropped from the branch, landing silently on the forest floor. The two Jonin spun in unison, drawing their own daggers, blades gleaming in the dappled sunlight. Steel rang out the instant they clashed. Ding! Metal against metal in a crisp, ringing salute. Nathan's eyes sharpened. This was exactly what he'd been waiting for. He swept his dagger in a low arc, the flat of the blade grazing moss before snapping upward toward his opponents. The Jonin braced themselves, feet rooted in the loamy earth, ready for the dance to begin. Above them, leaves stilled. Below, in the hush before the storm, Nathan tightened his grip. Each combatant awaited the other's first true strike, and Nathan was determined this time to turn the test into an opportunity. Sparks erupted as Nathan's kunai collided with the Jonin's dagger in a high-pitched hiss. In the same instant, a second Kirigakure Shinobi swept in from the side, blade aimed for Nathan's flank. Sensing the danger, Nathan released his hold, planted both feet firmly on the ground, and pivoted backward in one fluid motion. The first opponent's eyes gleamed. Seizing the opening, he lunged forward, determined to overwhelm Nathan completely. Clang, clang, clang. The steady ring of metal on metal marked Nathan's desperate defense as he faced 2 attackers at once, each clash pushing him further back. With every strike, his options dwindled. Then, in a sudden burst of energy, Nathan slipped free from the melee and darted away, retreating with startling speed. Almost immediately, the Jonin who'd tangled with him leapt into pursuit, mirroring Nathan's every step from a distance, unyielding, relentless, and intent on closing the gap. At that moment, Nathan shot his left hand upward and, with astonishing speed, formed the fire-style, great fireball technique seal. He thrust his chin forward and expelled a fist-sized orb of flame. In an instant, the fireball swelled into a blazing inferno and hurtled straight for the Kirigakure Jonin. For a heartbeat, the Jonin seemed caught off guard, but then a mocking smirk crossed his face. With a sudden kick against the earth, he sidestepped the attack by mere inches. At the same time, another Kirigakure Jonin charged Nathan, seizing the opening. Their seamless coordination made it clear they'd anticipated this very counterattack. Though the two had never faced Nathan in combat before, they'd watched his duel with Kaguya Morinosuke and taken careful notes. By now, they knew his tactics well enough to predict his next move. Seizing the moment, the 2 Kirigakure Jonin struck in perfect tandem. One drew Nathan into an obvious attack while the other circled in for a sneak strike. But Nathan didn't flinch. In a heartbeat, he whipped his head around toward the hidden assailant. The 3 Tomoe of his Sharingan spun to life, and he unleashed Genjutsu, Sharingan. The Jonin sensed something was wrong and murmured, "Not good," tearing his gaze away and vaulting backward. He'd already lost the chance. The instant their eyes met, Nathan's Genjutsu took hold. Though brief and not overwhelmingly powerful, it was enough to paralyze him. He stumbled back a few paces, then froze midair, utterly under Nathan's control. Nathan seized the opening. He drew several razor-sharp shuriken and sent them flying in a flurry. Swish, the blades whistled through the air, covering the few meters between them in an instant as they zeroed in on the Jonin's vital points. Before Nathan could react, a fresh volley of shurikens came hurtling in from the flank. Each one struck his own blades in midair, ding, 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 sending them spinning harmlessly to the ground. Nathan whirled toward the source of the attack and saw the mist-hidden ninja, the same shinobi who had just slipped free of his fire style, great fireball technique, poised in the shadows. In the next instant, Nathan darted forward in a blur of motion and Brack reappeared directly in front of his opponent. The two warriors faced off once more, the clash reset to its original standoff. Chapter 286, Heaven and Earth Reversed. A chill wind rustled through the treetops. Nathan stood opposite the two Kirigakure Jonin, the tension between them so thick it pressed on his lungs. Even the air seemed to congeal, driving the nearby Chunin to edge away until only the three combatants remained in the moonlit clearing. A lone leaf drifted down, momentarily blotting out Nathan's vision. No sooner had it fallen than the Jonin sprang into action, unleashing a volley of kunai that cut off every escape route and aimed squarely at his vital points. In an instant, Nathan's Sharingan snapped open. Time seemed to slow. He spotted each incoming blade and, more importantly, recognized the telltale paper tags wrapped around three of them. Explosive talismans. Reflexively, he drew a handful of kunai from his belt and flung them in a seamless counterstrike. The metals met with sharp, ringing clangs as sparks flew where steel met steel. The kunai deflected, spiraling away, but before Nathan could regroup, the concealed talismans detonated. Boom, boom, boom. 3 crimson fireballs erupted in succession, their brilliant light scorching the clearing and dispelling the shadows. Trees shuddered under the shockwaves, and the oppressive silence of moments before was shattered by crackling flames and the roar of battle. The distance closed so suddenly that Nathan had no choice but to slam his eyes shut against the abrupt shift from blinding light to cavernous dark. Now! At that signal, the second Kirigakure Jonin, already poised for the moment, shouted a hand seal and unleashed his ninjutsu. Turong, Tulong Spear! In an instant, the earth around Nathan erupted with countless jagged thorns, shooting upward like a nest of vipers, each aimed to impale him. Reacting on instinct, Nathan rolled aside, but there were too many spikes, and the Jonin's timing, speed, and accuracy were impeccable. He could only flinch. A sickening crack rang out as one barbed spear grazed his left arm, ripping through muscle and drawing a sharp flare of pain. Yet within a heartbeat, Nathan's eyes snapped open. The crimson glow of his Sharingan flared to life, its heightened perception slicing through the whirlwind of earth and iron. With that clarity, no hidden trap remained. Nathan moved with the fluid precision of a dancer on a razor's edge, each step, each pivot, perfectly measured. The remaining thorns crashed around him or clattered harmlessly against the ground, unable to close in on their true target. Nathan moved with uncanny precision, every step weaving him safely past the razor-sharp rock thorns. Though each dodge teetered on the brink of danger, his composed expression and unwavering gaze lent him an almost effortless cool. Observing from a short distance, Wasabi, a Kirigakure Jonin in the midst of casting a jutsu, couldn't help but frown. She'd clashed with Uchiha Jonin before, and she knew full well the power of their Sharingan. Yet she had never seen eyes so calm, so deceptively serene in the heat of combat. Could Nathan's vision really eclipse that of even the most battle-hardened Uchiha? The notion startled her. But the more she dwelled on it, the more plausible it seemed. After all, how else had this young shinobi managed to slay Kaguya Morinosuke? No matter her distaste for the erratic Kaguya clan, she had to acknowledge their strength, and Morinosuke was one of their finest. Only someone extraordinary could have kept pace with his ferocious assaults, flawlessly evading every strike before countering with lethal timing. Yes, Nathan must be exceptional indeed. Hiss, Wasabi involuntarily shivered. Nathan stood just meters away, showing no sign of chakra exhaustion. He realized with a jolt that they'd been deceived, but it was far too late for second thoughts. Already they were committed. Steeling himself, Wasabi turned to his teammates and called out, "Everyone ready?" "Right here," came the reply from the Kirigakure Jonin, Keide Hayakawa. Keide's hands whipped through the final seals. He then spread his arms wide and slammed his palms into the earth. In an instant, a torrent of raw chakra burst from his body, drilling downward into the ground. It surged along the hidden ley lines beneath their feet. Drink! Keide's shout rang out as he invoked the forbidden technique, ninja art, world inversion. A barely visible ripple pulsed outward from Keide's position, expanding in every direction. In moments, it blanketed a 30-meter radius around Nathan. Then, as if the earth itself had taken a willful breath, an invisible pressure shot up from below, crushing Nathan under a weight that multiplied the strain on his limbs and lungs. Nathan staggered, bracing himself against the unseen force, as Wasabi and the others closed in, their eyes burning with renewed determination. The battle had truly begun. Nathan staggered, a strangled groan escaping his lips as if unseen hands were slowing him down. Before he could fully regain his footing, the ground beneath his boots fractured with a sharp crack, then another, and another, until the earth around him resembled a shattered mirror, webbed with jagged fissures of every width. A crushing pressure bore down on him, forcing Nathan to dart left and right as the chasm snaked outward. He barely avoided the widening splits, but he knew this was only the beginning. The fractures raced across the terrain, speeding toward a critical threshold. In a single, thunderous instant, the earth ruptured. Soil and rock burst upward and inward, swallowing everything in their path. Wildflowers, trees, snakes, insects, even unsuspecting bystanders, entombing them in an instant. Then, as suddenly as it had erupted, the trembling ceased. The broken ground snapped back into place, the surface smoothing over as if nothing had happened. A perfect, unbroken plain lay where chaos had reigned moments before. Nathan's heart pounded as he realized what he'd just witnessed. An A-rank ninjutsu of terrifying power, earth release, reversal of heaven and earth. First, it pins its foe beneath oppressive gravity. Next, it buries them in a cascading maw of soil. Finally, it reseals the battlefield with one cataclysmic blast, erasing all trace of the devastation it wrought. Wasabi appeared beside Keita Hayakawa, his eyes fixed on the smooth, undisturbed earth. "Well?" he asked. "Did it work?" Keita panted, wiping sweat from her brow. "Yes," she gasped. "They're completely buried. I can feel them down there." Relief flooded Wasabi. He knew exactly how terrifying Keita's jutsu could be. Though it demanded a long series of hand seals and drained a massive amount of chakra, its raw power was undeniable. Even if the initial earth-shattering didn't kill a target outright, the pressure of the collapsing soil would crush bones, cut off air, or shatter an opponent into pieces. Once someone was entombed, they couldn't move, much less form the precise seals needed to break free or cast another ninjutsu. Wasabi's thoughts flicked to Nathan's Rasengan. Could a non-elemental technique like that punch through tons of packed earth? His heart skipped a beat until he reminded himself of the obvious. Even the Rasengan, with all its concentrated chakra, needed room to spin and shape its sphere. Buried beneath layers of soil, there simply wasn't the space for Nathan to complete the seal and unleash it. He exhaled, easing back into a relaxed stance. The mission had succeeded. Their opponent was trapped, and there was no chance of escape. Nathan shook his head in disbelief. "If you really intend to flee, you'll need Earth Escape Ninjutsu," he thought, recalling the lesson he'd once heard. But there was no way their opponent also knew the rare Muyin-2 escape technique, especially an escape-type jutsu. The odds were simply too slim. "Calm down," Nathan told himself. "It's impossible." No sooner had the doubt crossed his mind than a sickening crack rent the air, the sound of steel slicing through flesh. His comrade gasped, blood bubbling at his lips as he doubled over. Nathan whipped around and froze. There, looming behind Keita Hayakawa, stood a silhouette he recognized, in an instant. It wasn't a stranger's face at all, but his own. His heart hammered. How had he gotten there so quickly? Before Nathan could answer that question, Katie's eyes met his, wide with shock. Their battlefield had just grown far more complicated than any of them had anticipated. Chapter 287, Chaos. Nathan didn't yet know any Earth-style escape jutsu that didn't require hand seals, nor had he developed his Earth attribute chakra. That didn't mean he was without recourse, however. As the soil closed in around him, he activated his dojutsu ability, Heaven's Guard, entering a brief state of absolute invulnerability. In that instant, No technique in the ninja world, including Hayakawa Keide's, could harm him. You might wonder, didn't he vow never to expose his Mangekyo Sharingan so casually? True, Nathan had no desire to flaunt its power, but he refused to be hamstrung by fear. Being swallowed by the earth was the perfect cover. Even if he unleashed the Mangekyo Sharingan to fuel Heaven's Guard, no one would detect it. So he seized the opportunity. He could hardly have predicted Keide's exact jutsu, of course, but her prolonged preparation told him everything he needed to know. Whatever she was about to unleash had to be devastating. And under the safeguards of his dojutsu, he was ready. Nathan crouched in the shadows, listening for the telltale rumble of incoming jutsu. He knew that most ninjutsu, especially powerful ones, generated a tremendous commotion, and a big commotion made for perfect cover. He didn't need to guess exactly which technique his opponent would use, only that it would be loud enough to mask his movements. Otherwise, he wouldn't have waited around for the seals to complete. True, the Earth-style, Earth Spear, could have pinned him in place once the technique was unleashed. But if Hayakawa Keide had truly intended to interrupt his advance, she had countless opportunities. The Shadow Clone technique, a surprise shuriken volley, or simply creating distance. The fact that she let him finish his preparations spoke volumes. As the last whispers of her earth jutsu settled into the night air, Nathan called upon his own secret weapon, the Heavenly Guardian. In the blink of an eye, he vanished and reappeared behind Keide. Before she realized what was happening, his blade had sliced through her defenses and driven straight into her heart. Ugh! Keide gasped, blood bubbling at her lips. A crimson arc painted the air as she clutched her chest. Wasabi, standing a short distance away, spun around at the sound of Keide's cry. Her eyes went wide, her face draining of color. She had never seen a shinobi fall so suddenly, or so violently. Nathan stepped back, the blade slick with fresh blood. All around them, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The brief clash of jutsu had ended, and only the final, terrible echo of Keide's fall remained. Nathan's sudden appearance behind him sent Wasabi reeling. "You," he sputtered, but before he could finish, Nathan dissolved into thin air, and a pair of blazing, blood-red Sharingan filled his vision. "No. It's an illusion," Wasabi shouted, pouring every last drop of chakra into dispelling the genjutsu. He strained with all his might, but it was too late. With a soft, sinister hiss, Nathan withdrew a dagger from Hayakawa Keide's side, and in one fluid motion slashed across Wasabi's throat. Warm blood spurted out as Wasabi staggered backward, clawing at the gash, his vision clouding. Only strangled, helpless whimpers escaped his lips. Behind him, two heavy thuds echoed through the chamber. First, Keide hit the ground, then Wasabi collapsed beside her. Even a ninja's resilience can only do so much. Though both clung to life for agonizing moments, gravely wounded as they were, neither survived the fatal blow. Nathan surveyed the two fallen mist ninjas before him, wiping the blood from beneath his left eye, a remnant of his recent use of the Heaven's Guard technique, and let out a long, steadying breath. Aside from the three sword-wielding operatives, every other mist-hidden ninja had fallen by his hand. Those who'd watched him in action, whether special assassins or chunin, now stood slack-jawed, their morale crumbling. By contrast, the Konoha shinobi nearby grinned with renewed hope. Though the odds remained against them, desperation had lifted. With a quick flick, Nathan sent blood off his blade. The surviving mist ninjas instinctively recoiled as his presence pressed in on them. Still, he held his ground, and instead turned his gaze toward the distant skirmish involving three jonin. Uchiha Shisui hovered overhead, his kite drifting gracefully on the breeze, while Muri Jinpachi, fearsome as ever, unleashed his explosive blade, flying foam technique, its devastating force sweeping through the enemy ranks. Nathan scanned the battlefield and analyzed each engagement in turn. First, Uchiha Shisui's flawless combination of genjutsu, ninjutsu, and the body flicker technique left no openings. Nathan couldn't possibly tip the scales there, so he set that fight aside. Next was the captain's duel with Kuroki Reiga. Reiga's Thunderblade, Fuga, with its lightning control, would terrify any ordinary shinobi, but the captain's wind-style ninjutsu channeled the lightning away, and his fire techniques forced Reiga onto the defensive. That skirmish was under control, for the moment at least. Only the deputy captain remained a concern. Of the three jonin, he was by far the weakest. Even wielding his broken sword, Beheading Slash, he'd been hard-pressed against Biwa Juzo and already carried several wounds. Yet Nathan refused to leap in. He knew that if he didn't first stabilize the larger battle and keep the Chunin from breaking, any rescue would only leave the Jonin exposed, and it would be the Jonin who paid the price in the end. Determined, he held his ground and stuck to his plan. Before Nathan could join Uchiha Shisui and the others in facing the three ninja swordsmen, he knew he had to thin out some of Kirigakure's Chunin and special Jonin first, both to relieve his Konoha allies and to enter the main battle with confidence. With that plan in mind, he wasted no time. In a blur of motion, he darted into the midst of the enemy ranks. Ah! A Kirigakure Chunin scream cut off abruptly as Nathan's hand shot out and clamped around his throat. With a smooth, practiced motion, Nathan activated his chakra absorption technique. In seconds, the young shinobi's life force was sapped completely. Without hesitation, Nathan moved on to the next opponent, wounding him grievously before repeating the same draining maneuver. Within moments, another Kirigakure Chunin fell, his chakra completely harvested. Nathan felt his own reserve swell. He was now well over 40,000 chakra points. Just then, a group of Kirigakure Special Jonin closed in, their formation snapping shut around him like a steel trap. They believed their numbers would intimidate him, but Nathan showed no sign of fear. Instead, he calmly counted his adversaries, already calculating how to break their encirclement and finish the job. 1, 2, 3. At that signal, a Kirigakure Special Jonin roared, "Kill him!" In an instant, a wave of shinobi charged Nathan from all sides. The clearing erupted into chaos. Surrounded and outnumbered, Nathan spun his blade, unleashed crackling spells, and warped his foes with Sharingan illusions, everything short of invoking the Manjikyo. The first casualty came swiftly. As a Jonin lunged in, Nathan formed a glowing blue sphere of chakra in his palm. The Rasengan slammed into the man's abdomen, and he crumpled to the ground, grievously wounded. For a heartbeat, the attackers faltered, then pressed on with renewed fury. Blades sliced through the air, shuriken whistled past, and elemental jutsu collided in blinding flashes. Nathan, his Sharingan blazing, anticipated each move. He darted left, slipped right, and evaded every strike with inhuman agility. Amid the swirling onslaught, Nathan's eyes scanned for an opening. As the Kirigakure Jonin closed in, he readied himself for the counterattack that would turn the tide of battle. Chapter 288, Breaking Time slipped away in the midst of battle. In the blink of an eye, a quarter of an hour had passed. The 4 Kirigakure Special Jonin who had surrounded Nathan now lay dead or grievously wounded, while Nathan himself bore only a few shallow cuts and bruises, wounds already sealed by his improved palm fairy technique. This fight had proven one simple fact. Once a shinobi's power surpasses a certain threshold, human wave tactics lose their effectiveness. Individually, those 4 Jonin were more than a match for ordinary shinobi. Together, they had hoped to overwhelm Nathan, but they hadn't counted on the full extent of his arsenal. His level 6, almost level 7 swordsmanship, his A-rank seal-free ninjutsu, the Rasengan, and his mastery of one-handed seals. Any single one of these techniques could fell a standard Jonin. Combined and amplified by the power of his 3 Magatama Sharingan, Nathan was simply untouchable. Swish! His blade flashed across one Jonin's chest. With a graceful flick, Nathan withdrew the sword and took a deliberate step back, his gaze calm and unhurried. Around him, the roar of the battlefields fell silent, each fallen warrior a testament to his supremacy. Now, as he stood alone against the few survivors, the next move rested squarely in his hands. A thin veil of mist began to rise, quickly thickening until even the faint moonlight struggled to penetrate. Night had already cast everything into shadow, and now this artificial fog turned the world around Nathan into an opaque blur. He recognized it at once, Kirigakure's signature jutsu, water-style, hidden mist technique. Moments earlier, a pair of Kirigakure Special Jonin had tried to blind him with the same technique. Nathan had tapped into his Sharingan, locked onto their chakra signatures, and cut them down before they could finish. That jutsu had been undone by force. This one, however, was different. As his eyes rotated through all the Sharingan's tome, he found no trace of their chakra. Whoever had cast this must be lurking in the shadows, reinforcements slipping in unseen. A smile curved Nathan's lips. Let them come. He raised his hands, preparing the seals to disperse the mist. But before he could complete them, a volley of kunai whistled through the fog toward him. Swallowing a curse, he abandoned the seals and rolled sideways, narrowly evading the deadly knives. The kunai struck the ground where he'd been standing, and in that instant, boom! A deafening explosion shattered the stillness, the force of it tearing at the mist and throwing Nathan off his feet. When the smoke cleared, Nathan's heart pounded. The battle had just reached a terrifying new level. Nathan realized too late that those kunai were rigged with hidden detonation talismans. The instant one struck the fog-shrouded ground, a fireball blossomed, its shockwave carving a clean circle through the rolling white mist. For a heartbeat, Nathan could see the world around him. Then the smoke recoiled as if alive, surging back to its original thickness and swallowing him in opaque gray again. His narrow escape, however, had already drawn the attention of Kirigakure's elite. Before Nathan could regain his bearings, a fresh volley of kunai hissed through the air. He stiffened, listening. The faint swish of metal slicing fog, the almost imperceptible shift of air. These were no ordinary shinobi. Their silent killing technique was so refined that they could pinpoint his position from the subtlest disturbance in the mist. Nathan's heart pounded. He leapt aside, narrowly avoiding the first wave, but as soon as he touched down, another barrage followed. He dared not risk a glance. In this deadly game, even a moment's hesitation could spell catastrophe. Steeling himself, Nathan leapt into motion, weaving through the incoming blades. Each dodge brought him closer to uncovering the next ambush, and closer to the truth behind Kirigakure's lethal fog. Nathan quickly grasped his opponent's strategy. They intended to wear him down, with a relentless barrage of attacks, and then strike, when he finally faltered. A sound tactic. After all, even the best defense cracks under sustained pressure. Sooner or later, constant dodging reveals an opening. But could these mist ninjas really keep up the onslaught? Nathan doubted it. After narrowly evading 2 successive waves of shuriken and kunai, he sprinted toward a towering tree at the edge of the clearing. With a powerful leap, he landed on a thick branch, just as the third volley hissed past his head. Perched above the fray, he wasted no time. Forming hand seals with lightning speed, Nathan prepared his counterattack. The fourth wave, his last chance, rushed in. Summoning every ounce of chakra, he drew in a lungful of air and then exhaled with explosive force. A swirling vortex of wind erupted at his feet, growing in an instant into a raging cyclone spanning more than 10 meters in radius. The Mist Ninja's weapons and projectiles were caught up in the gale, scattering harmlessly away as leaves and debris whirled through the air. Nathan landed lightly on the branch, the wind still howling around him. Below, his adversaries staggered, their formation broken, their confidence shaken. The momentum had shifted. Now, it was his turn to press the attack. Nathan sensed subtle disturbances at the edge of the storm and let out a mocking sneer. He ignored them and instead wove his chakra to drive the gale outward with surgical precision. In the past, even with wind style, great breakthrough perfected, he could never have controlled the tempest so deftly. But now, having upgraded his windblade technique to level 6, his understanding of wind nature chakra had deepened. Mastery of flow and form made all the difference. It was like how most shinobi's water style, water wall, can only protect a single direction, yet Senju Tobirama's variant shields him on every side. Proficiency matters above all. Raising his hand, Nathan called upon wind style, great breakthrough. In an instant, a roaring vortex tore through the dense white mist, scattering it like dandelion fluff. The Kirigakure shinobi tried desperately to pour water nature chakra back into the fog, but their efforts were futile. To power that one devastating blast, Nathan had burned 2,000 units of chakra in a single surge. Nathan's wind-style great breakthrough unleashed devastation on par with a natural disaster. Bolstered by his mastery of ninjutsu, the technique was overwhelming and impossible to sustain. After just a few moments, the roiling fog he'd summoned faded away. Peering through the thinning mist, Nathan took in the dozens of Mist Village shinobi perched on branches or crouched at ground level. A cold, mocking smile tugged at his lips as he called out, "Is this really the best the Mist Village can muster?" But not one of those elite chunin or special jonin flinched. None gave him the reaction he craved. Nathan's amusement shifted to impatience. If they wouldn't move, he would. In the blink of an eye, he dashed forward, closing the gap to a nearby ninja. His short sword flashed in a lethal arc toward the man's throat, only to be intercepted mid-swing by a storm of flying shuriken. Spotting them at the last second, Nathan sidestepped with effortless grace, letting the metal stars clang harmlessly to the ground. His eyes gleamed with renewed interest. Now they had made the first move. At last, the Kirigakure Chunin standing before him snapped into action. With a quick roll, he sent a smoke bomb skidding across the ground and slipped back into the rear ranks. Nathan didn't give chase. Instead, he activated his flash body technique. His form blurred in a heartbeat and reappeared behind another Chunin. Earlier, when they'd first tried to corner him, none of these mid-level ninja had been present. Now that they'd arrived, Nathan saw no reason to hold back. Whether the Kirigakure Jonin had called them in as reinforcements didn't interest him. They were all fair game, and whoever stepped forward first was going to pay the price. Chapter 289, First Confrontation. Half an hour passed in the blink of an eye. Nathan yanked his dagger free from the chest of a Mist Village Jonin and let the body collapse to the ground. He took in the scene around him. Only a handful of Mist Shinobi remained, still trying to close in, while dozens of their comrades lay motionless at his feet. The past 30 minutes of brutal, close-quarters combat had clearly taken a heavy toll on them. Wiping blood from his blade, Nathan cast a cool, satisfied glance over the survivors. "Running low on backup?" he asked, his tone laced with quiet triumph. The Mist Ninja exchanged uneasy looks. No one dared deny it. They'd lost too many fighters while Nathan stood unscathed. Still, they weren't about to let him slip away. With grim determination, they began gesturing for reinforcements. Then, cutting through the tense moment, came the whistling rush of wind. Nathan glanced to the side and sprang back a half step. In the next instant, a massive blade swept past his eyes and buried itself in the trunk of a nearby oak with a thunderous crack. The steel slid in as effortlessly as a hot knife through butter, its razor-sharp edge gleaming. Before he could recover, a hulking figure materialized directly in front of him and slammed a kick into Nathan's head. Nathan reacted on instinct, snapping his left arm across his side to absorb the blow. The impact echoed through his bones, hurling him 2 meters across the clearing. He hardly touched the ground before the stranger was on him again, fist cocked for a punch to the face. Nathan pivoted at the last moment, letting the rush of wind graze his cheek. Drawing his sword in one fluid motion, he slashed out to counterattack. But the burly assailant, deceptively quick, twisted away, leaving the blade to carve a shallow furrow in the dirt. Nathan barely had time to steady his breathing when another whip-like kick arced toward his head. He snapped his arm up to block, then drove his fist forward in an instant counterattack. On the training field, the thunder of flesh striking flesh rang out as they traded blows, dozens of strikes in rapid succession. At last, Nathan parried a final blow and watched his opponent stagger back. With a few deft leaps, the man distanced himself and strode over to retrieve the massive broadsword lying at his feet. Only then did the surrounding Mist Shinobi shake off their shock and cry out in unison, "Master Biwa Juzang!" The name carried weight. Biwa Juzang was famed for both his battle experience and raw power. No wonder that, when Might Dai shattered the 7 ninja swordsmen months ago, he emerged as one of the 3 survivors, one of the legendary 3 lucky treasures. Though their exchange had been brief, Nathan recognized immediately that Yuzang's skill already surpassed that of an ordinary jonin, even without wielding the broken sword, beheading sword. Nathan's gaze flicked to the ruined remains of the deputy captain, cleaved clean through the waist and lying motionless some distance away. Even an upper-rank shinobi like a deputy captain stood no chance against a master such as Biwa Juzo. He'd once clung to the hope that someone could stop Juzo, but that hope died the moment he saw the man's effortless brutality. Nathan exhaled slowly and refocused on his adversary. Juzo, eyes cold and unblinking, simply waited. "Heh," Juzo murmured, lips curling in a hint of amusement. Nathan didn't reply. He activated his Sharingan, weaving a subtle genjutsu over the clearing, then launched a volley of kunai toward Juzo. The projectiles vanished against an invisible barrier. and Juzo made no sign of concern. With practiced ease, he drew the legendary beheading sword from the massive tree trunk beside him. The blade, renowned for its uncanny sharpness, spun 90 degrees in his hand before plunging deep into the earth. There it stood, upright and immovable, a silent declaration of the lethal power Nathan was about to face. Nathan's kunai rang against the broad blade of Biwa Juzo's fabled beheading sword, sparks of thieves sound echoing through the arena. Undeterred by the block, Nathan planted both feet, coiled like a spring, and launched himself forward with explosive force. In the blink of an eye, he closed the distance, driving his short sword through the small semicircular gap beside the beheading sword's hilt, aiming directly for Juzo's chest. But Juzo, newly freed from the haze of his own illusion, reacted in an instant. With a casual tilt of his blade, he sent Nathan's strike whistling into empty air. Then, without missing a beat, Juzo surged forward, the massive beheading sword sweeping toward Nathan's face in a single lethal arc. Memories of their earlier skirmish flashed through Nathan's mind. He knew how devastating Juzo's close-quarters power could be. A frontal clash was suicide. With a sharp exhale, he planted his feet again and leapt backward, putting precious distance between them before Juzo's blade could claim its next victim. Biwa Juzang's sword sang through the air in one seamless strike, and without missing a heartbeat, he followed it up with another vicious slash. Nathan felt the wind of the blade's cutting edge brush past his face, and on pure instinct, dropped low, letting the sword carve through empty space above him. In the instant between Biwa's first barrage and his next surge of power, Nathan lunged forward. He drove his short sword with all his weight toward the gap in his opponent's guard, aiming straight for the heart. Alerted by the sudden thrust, Biwa twisted his body sideways at the last possible moment. The steel whistled past, grazing his armor, but leaving him unscathed. That near miss was all it took to awaken Biwa's full attention. He raised his blade and stared at Nathan with a new intensity, his eyes sharp with respect and caution. Earlier, Biwa had assumed Nathan was simply a formidable ninjutsu user. After all, he'd witnessed the wind-style, Rasen Shuriken that felled Kaguya Morinosuke. But this flawless display of swordsmanship, even in just a few swift exchanges, proved that Nathan's true strength lay in the blade. And now, Biwa Juzang knew he could not afford to underestimate him. Juzang Biwa surveyed the bodies strewn across the floor and the neat slashes cutting through them. To him, these fallen fighters had all been nothing more than ants, cannon fodder whose skills were too unremarkable to matter. It wasn't until he'd felt Nathan's blade for himself that he finally paused to reassess. But even then, caution was all he granted. It hardly amounted to fear. In terms of swordplay or knife work, few could truly unsettle him. Besides, even the finest technique only shines when paired with an equally formidable weapon. The dagger Nathan wielded was clearly no match for Juzang's own beheading sword. He felt utterly confident. Fear, he decided, was simply out of the question. Chapter 290, A Shift in Perspective. Die! Biwa Juzang's voice split the air as he materialized before Nathan in the blink of an eye. He hefted his enormous beheading sword and swung with savage intent, not aiming for a precise kill shot at the neck or heart, but simply seeking any point of contact. Nathan knew exactly why. Once that massive blade drew blood, it didn't matter where. It would cleave through flesh and bone alike. Biwa's wild, open and closed style lacked the refinement of true swordsmanship, but against a weapon like the beheading sword, it was devastatingly effective. Its brutal arcs played to the blade's strengths, and it was precisely that lack of polish that unsettled Nathan. He alone possessed the Sharingan, the optic jutsu that let him predict an opponent's angle and strength. Without it, handling this relentless assault would be nearly impossible. Clang, clang, clang. The metallic rings of steel on steel echoed around them as Nathan planted his feet and raised his dagger in desperate defense. Each strike from Biwa's great sword thudded into his blade, sending violent shockwaves up his arms. Sweat stung his eyes, and his grip tightened against the recoil, but with every passing second, the weight of Biwa's onslaught grew. Step by agonizing step, Nathan's advantage began to slip away, and he found himself sinking toward defeat. The other Kirigakure ninjas shifted uneasily around the clearing. At last, one of their special jonin could no longer contain himself. Silently forming a series of hand seals, he called forth water style, water whip. A sinuous torrent erupted from his palm, coalescing into a long serpentine whip that glided toward Nathan. At first it advanced at a steady pace, but the moment it sensed its target, it struck forward like a venomous snake. Even that speed couldn't match Nathan's reflexes. With his Sharingan eyes tracking every ripple in the water whip, he smoothly leaned back, simultaneously evading Biwajuzo's infamous beheading sword, then sprang backward to create distance. In the same fluid motion, he formed another seal with his left hand and unleashed fire-style, great fireball technique. The blazing sphere collided with the water whip in a thunderous hiss, sending up a thick cloud of white steam that quickly spread over a 10-meter radius. Though the mist hung heavily in the air, its vapor was no real barrier, just a fleeting veil of water. Although the allied mist shinobi can no longer blanket the battlefield in a thick fog like their legendary water-style, hidden mist technique, the lingering haze still provides just enough cover. That's all Nathan needs. Sensing Biwajuzo's momentary hesitation, he forms the seals in rapid succession. In the next heartbeat, he unleashes his shadow clone technique. The single figure before them splits into 4 indistinguishable Nathans. The originals and his 3 clones exchange quick nods. Without wasting a second, one clone darts toward the outer ring of mist ninjas, both to carry out Nathan's plan of eliminating the perimeter guards and to keep reinforcements from interfering. Nathan and the remaining 2 prepare for the main assault. What about his chakra reserves? Nathan anticipated this challenge. Earlier, when he'd been surrounded by mist chunin, he seized the chance to drain their energy with his chakra absorption technique. As a result, even after dividing himself into 4, each Nathan still carries over 10,000 chakra points, more than enough to see them through the upcoming battle. One of the teams slipped away to deal with the mist ninjas skirting the perimeter, leaving Nathan and his 2 shadow clones facing Biwajuzo. Juzo didn't flinch or scoff at their use of shadow clones. After all, he'd seen what happened when Nathan unleashed his wind-style, Rasen Shuriken, against Kaguya Morinosuke. Anyone still daring to dismiss that technique would be flirting with death. Biwajuzo's gaze flicked from Nathan to the clones and back again. "Planning to use that again?" he asked, his tone half mocking, half serious. Exactly the reaction Nathan wanted. As long as Juzo feared the Rasen Shuriken more than any other attack, he'd hold himself back, just enough to give Nathan room to maneuver, whether he chose to strike with that same deadly wind jutsu or spring a different trap. A familiar prickle of awareness, like dozens of eyes on him, hovered at the edge of Nathan's consciousness. It lingered longer this time, tugging at his guard. He frowned, then deliberately let his shoulders relax. If someone was watching, so much the better. He'd be ready. Nathan had already deduced his adversary's game. The wind-style, spiraling shuriken he'd unleashed to kill Kaguya Morinosuke had put every mist ninja on high alert, and even the hidden enemies in the shadows were watching his every move. No wonder they'd reacted the moment he fired off a shadow clone. They were probing for his weakness. Nathan didn't mind. He hadn't even decided whether to cast that jutsu again, and if they noticed it, so much the better. He could use their attention against them. The only reason he'd needed a clone's help before launching the spiraling shuriken was simple. His control wasn't yet perfect, and he wasn't confident he could hit a target one-on-one. Let them think he depended on shadow clones to pull off his signature move. When his skill grew, he'd spring a real surprise. And even if they weren't fooled now, it didn't matter. Beyond refining his elemental techniques, Nathan guarded a far more dangerous secret, his Mangekyo Sharingan. Nathan's mind raced. As long as his secret remained buried, nothing else mattered. It wasn't like he was unveiling some forbidden jutsu, just a wind release, Rasen Shuriken. He didn't need to hold back. Before Biwajuzo could even react, Nathan surged forward and split into 2 shadow clones, flooding the battlefield with 3 copies of himself. Most shinobi would balk at facing a single pair of Sharingan eyes, but 3 pairs? Dodging that many illusionary onslaughts was virtually impossible. He and his clones couldn't share their vision perfectly the way Pain's 6 bodies could, but they still fought as a seamless unit, each movement synchronized. That unity was Nathan's real advantage, provided he adapted his tactics. In their first encounter, he'd used his short sword to parry Biwa Juzo's infamous decapitating sword technique. Now, though, any direct clash would crumble his clones under the sheer force of the attack. He had to rethink his whole approach, and fast. Nathan knew that if his shadow clone didn't engage the enemy directly, his true body would be laid bare. To keep his foe from discerning which was real and which was a copy, he had no choice but to stay on the move. Fortunately, both he and his clone wielded the Sharingan. With that powerful eye technique, they could read their opponent's slightest movements and avoid a disastrous head-on collision. Time slipped away as the fight wore on. One shadow clone wove through the mist to ensnare an outer mist ninja, while deep inside the enclave, Biwa Juzo began to falter. Caught between Nathan's true form and two shadow clones, the famed swordsman's defenses were crumbling under their relentless assault. Chapter 291, Broken Sword and Impending Danger. Clang! Nathan's blade struck the decapitation sword again, and Loquat Juzang staggered back, gasping for air. They had been locked in combat for nearly half an hour. Constantly guarding against Nathan's Sharingan Genjutsu had sapped his chakra reserves, and now his defenses were beginning to give way. Nathan noted the fatigue creeping into Juzang's stance. His opponent was undeniably skilled, but even without unleashing the full power of his Mangekyo Sharingan, Nathan still held the upper hand. Unlike Kaguya Morinosuke, who wielded the dreaded corpse bone pulse, Juzang possessed no Kekkei Genkai or supernatural technique. His fighting prowess rested solely on the razor-sharp decapitation sword and a lifetime of battlefield experience. That mix might terrify an ordinary jonin, but against Nathan, it simply wasn't enough. It was only a matter of time before Juzang's advantage evaporated. Nathan still held back from a full-on assault. Instead, he methodically drained the Konoha Chunin of chakra and stamina, exploiting every opening without overcommitting. His earlier massacre of Kirigakure's special Jonin and Chunin had already relieved much of the pressure on the Leaf Shinobi. There was no risk of the situation spiraling out of control. Better to grind it out, inch by inch. Remarkably, after 3 battles, Nathan's swordsmanship proficiency had climbed significantly. He was on the cusp of level 7. He knew that if Loquat Juzang could contribute just a fraction more experience, his skill would ascend to perfection. This wasn't wishful thinking. With his 3 shadow clones all absorbing experience in parallel, the effective training speed far outstripped that of a lone fighter. Overlapping perceptions might slightly diminish returns, but overall efficiency soared nonetheless. By Nathan's calculations, cross-referenced with his prior proficiency curves, this 4-fold training scheme guaranteed exactly the boost he needed. He wouldn't let this chance slip away. Minutes ticked by. Nathan maintained his steady pace, calmly sapping the last reserves of his exhausted opponents. Nearly 10 minutes later, however, Loquat Juzang's condition took a dangerous turn for the worse. He had launched attack after attack against Nathan and his shadow clones, but Nathan, relying on the piercing insight of his Sharingan, evaded every one. With time running out, he scanned for the perfect moment to land a killing blow. The idea of letting his opponent slip away and leaving the story's direction to Matt Dai never even crossed his mind. Since arriving in this world, Nathan understood that the script had already been rewritten. There was no longer any reason to hold back. Ding, ding, dang, dang. The clash of blades rang through the air as the battle raged on. Then, at the precise instant he'd been waiting for, Nathan unleashed Genjutsu, Sharingan. The window was fleeting, and his reaction time razor-thin, so the illusion wasn't overwhelmingly strong, but it was enough. Loquat Shizang froze, dazed by the flash of the Sharingan. That split-second hesitation was all Nathan's 2 remaining shadow clones needed to close in for the decisive strike. Rasengan. In the blink of an eye, a dense sphere of chakra nearly 2 feet across materialized in the palm of one of Nathan's shadow clones. Juzang Loquat sensed the sudden threat, dove back, and just avoided the spiraling ball of energy. He let out a breath, until a harsh shout cut through the air. He spun around. A second shadow clone of Nathan stood before him, a colossal chakra-charged shuriken whirling at lightning speed in its hand, distorting the air as it cut forward. That was the real attack. For a moment, Juzang's heart raced, but he didn't falter. From the instant Nathan had unleashed his shadow clone technique, Juzang had braced for a double strike. His vigilance paid off. Just before the shuriken clone lunged, he slipped away with a flawless water replacement jutsu. Even with the Sharingan's edge, Nathan's clone never had time to adjust. Its aim. Nathan's shadow clone launched the wind release, spinning shuriken, and shattered Loquat Juzo's water clone. The technique detonated in midair, and the clone that had wielded it was the first to take the full force. Its body buckled under the backlash and collapsed in a heap. Low proficiency really is a problem, Nathan thought grimly. Z! A high-pitched whistle sliced through the air. In the same instant, Nathan himself formed a spinning shuriken of wind chakra in his hand and charged toward Loquat Juzo. The two shadow clones had been keeping Juzo on the defensive, forcing him to dodge wildly, and now Nathan's real body joined the assault. Juzo, still reeling from having to substitute himself with another water clone, had no time to escape. Realizing the danger at the last possible moment, Loquat Juzo thrust his decapitating sword forward, using its broad blade to block the incoming shuriken. The wind release. Rasen shuriken tore into the decapitating broadsword with a screech like needles on steel, an ear-splitting grind that set every nerve alight. It didn't last long. In less than a heartbeat, Loquat Juzang's fearsome blade shattered. Now all that remained in Biwa Juzo's hand was the hilt. The sword's once proud blade had exploded into countless fragments that scattered across the clearing. The Rasen shuriken itself detonated as well, unleashing a spray of razor-sharp chakra needles. Nathan staggered backward, mind reeling at the sudden destruction. He kicked off the ground with both feet and rocketed more than 10 meters away, coming to a halt in a skid of displaced earth. Dozens of sword shards had peppered his clothing and embedded themselves in his skin. Superficial cuts, thankfully, but painful all the same. Worse still were the chakra needles. Several had pierced deeper than he liked. Gritting his teeth, Nathan flexed his arms and legs, checking every inch of his body for fatal injuries. His heart hammered in his chest as he assessed the damage and prepared for whatever came next. After what felt like an eternity, Nathan let out a long, shuddering breath. Because he'd broken away in time, the chakra needles had only grazed him. None remained lodged in his flesh, and he'd escaped without serious injury. He thought back to how wind-style, Rasen shuriken, really worked. Its initial explosion was devastating, yes, but the true carnage came from the microscopic wind chakra blades that tore through an opponent's body from the inside. By slipping free early, he'd avoided the worst of that merciless aftermath. The same principle applied to his own arm. Whenever he formed a Rasen shuriken, he risked those shards cutting him from within. As long as they didn't linger too long, his limb held up. But let them press on for even a moment beyond his limit, and after only a use or two, his arm would be shattered, turning the feared forbidden jutsu into a total failure. Nathan pressed his fingers to his shoulder, determination burning in his eyes. He would not let this technique claim his body again. Until he could master his chakra control, he vowed never to risk himself with the wind style, Rasen shuriken. It was simply too dangerous. Chapter 292, Breaking News. Nathan ran a quick check over his body. No serious injuries. Turning his gaze to Biwa Juzang, he saw just how battered his opponent was. Juzang had succeeded in blocking the initial force of Nathan's wind style, Rasen shuriken, with his beheading sword, but he paid dearly for it. Nathan understood better than most that the true danger of the Rasen shuriken lay not in the impact itself, but in the chain of microscopic explosions that followed. Juzang, caught off guard, was just a fraction too slow to evade, and found himself enveloped in a blistering orb of chakra needles. He managed to break free almost immediately, yet the brief exposure had already wreaked havoc on his body. As if that weren't enough, the beheading sword, shattered by the blast, sent shards flying. Just as many fragments found purchase in Juzang's flesh as those embedded in Nathan's own arms. The combined toll of internal and external wounds left Juzang far worse off than Nathan. But mercy was a luxury Nathan refused to afford his enemy. He wiped the blood from his lips, stepped forward, and prepared to finish the fallen dog once and for all. Nathan's fingers flicked, and a flurry of shuriken shot forth like streaks of lightning. Even badly wounded, Biwa Juzo's battle-hardened instincts never faltered. He slipped aside at the last instant, narrowly escaping the blades. That was exactly the opening Nathan had counted on. In the same heartbeat, the shadow clone that had just unleashed the Rasengan surged forward, hurtling straight at Juzo with deadly force. Nathan himself fell back a few strides, scanning his body for injuries. None were life-threatening, but on a battlefield, even a minor wound could become a liability. He also needed to restore his chakra. After successive uses of the shadow clone technique and wind style, Rasen Shuriken, his reserves had plummeted to critical levels. Kneeling, he withdrew the fragmented hilt of the beheading sword fixed at his waist and focused inward. Through his Sharingan, Nathan watched the edges of his cuts draw together, the raw heat of his 50% chakra pool fueling the healing process. 15 points of constitution weren't just a statistic, they were the reason his flesh knitted itself back into place so quickly. He let the chakra flow around him in a gentle current, patching torn sinew and bone while the clone bought him time against the formidable Juzo. Once he felt sufficiently healed and his chakra warning light disappeared, Nathan would rejoin the fray, refreshed, refocused, and ready to finish what he'd started. But it's still not enough, Nathan muttered under his breath. He flashed through a series of hand seals and unleashed his perfected Palm Immortal technique, channeling 3 concentrated orbs of Yang-style chakra directly into each of his wounds. In moments, fresh skin closed over torn flesh, and Nathan allowed himself a small nod of satisfaction. No sooner had he finished healing than he activated instant body technique and vanished from sight, only to reappear among the shadow clones battling the Mist Ninja reinforcements at the perimeter. Over the long fight, those original Kirigakure Chunin had been whittled down, replaced by later arriving Mist Ninja reinforcements, prime targets for Nathan's clones, who had already dispatched several. By siphoning chakra from these lesser foes, the clones relieved the pressure on Konoha's own Chunin lining the central battlefield. In Nathan's mind, each defeated Mist Ninja became a makeshift battery to recharge his forces. A sudden shift in the air told him one of the Kirigakure Chunin was closing in. Before the shinobi could even draw a breath of alarm, Nathan blurred forward in a gust of wind. Ah! The Chunin hardly had time to register Nathan's approach. Instinctively, he swung his kunai in a desperate arc, only to feel its blade scrape uselessly across Nathan's throat. The would-be attacker froze, stunned. His eyes went wide as he realized the powerful shinobi before him was still very much alive and unharmed. A flush of joy spread across his face. Nathan had survived. But just as the Chunin let himself relax, a hollow emptiness spread through his body, as if someone had scooped out his insides. Dazed, he blinked and looked up again. Nathan was still standing there, calm and unyielding. "Genjutsu?" he gasped, panic flaring in his chest. He hadn't even realized he'd fallen into Nathan's illusion. Desperately, he tried to repeat his earlier attack, to strike Nathan down before the jutsu could take full effect. But as he summoned his arm, it refused his command. His chakra was gone, completely drained. Worse still, his strength and even his will felt sapped away. His breaths came in ragged gasps. Frantically, he glanced downward and saw Nathan's hand clamped around his throat. A sinister suction pulsed from Nathan's palm, and the Chunin's chakra poured out of him like molten silver, slipping away in an unstoppable torrent. "Heh!" Nathan's low chuckle cut through the Chunin's struggles. The mist-hidden Chunin thrashed weakly, but there was no power left to free himself. Within seconds, less than 10, Nathan had siphoned every last drop of his chakra. The Chunin's limbs went limp, and he crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Nathan released the lifeless body from his grip and felt a surge of chakra flood through him, a 10,000-point boost that left him momentarily elated. With that kind of energy restoration, he told himself, he could take on anyone. He inhaled deeply, ready for whatever came next. Then, without warning, a deafening crack of thunder split the air, followed by a chilling scream. Nathan's heart lurched. "No way," he muttered, spinning toward the sound. There, at the battlefield's center, their captain shuddered under a blinding bolt of lightning, a jagged strike summoned by the fearsome Black Hoe Thunderfang. Within seconds, the captain's armor and flesh were reduced to charcoal. Black Hoe Leia stood calm and collected, the very image of menace as he eyed Nathan. Nathan staggered back, his confidence evaporating. Had he really just jinxed them all? On the opposite flank, Loquat Juzang pressed the attack as well, trading blows with Nathan's shadow clone in a desperate bid to wear it down. But in that suspended moment, neither attack nor defense mattered. Three figures, Nathan, Black Ho Leia, and Loquat Juzang, locked eyes across the silent field, each waiting to see who would strike next. Nathan's blood drips onto the ground with a sharp click, like the ticking of a clock. In an instant, the battlefield snaps back into full view, the frantic shouts of rival ninjas, the agonized cries of the wounded, the rattling of shuriken and kunai, the thunderous detonation of explosive tags. Before he can draw breath, a blinding bolt of lightning tears through the air. Nathan wastes no time. He vanishes in a blur with his blink technique. Seconds later, the lightning strikes dead center of the field, carving a massive crater into the earth. His heart races as he materializes just beyond the blast radius. No sooner has he landed than Loquat Juzang charges, his massive, decapitating broadsword gleaming with murderous intent. Nathan ducks, narrowly evading the sweeping arc of the blade. In that fleeting moment, he sees the sword shatter along its edge, only to knit itself back together, bone-white cracks sealing up as fresh blood drips from its maw. The decapitating broadsword is notoriously brittle, but its regenerative power is unrivaled. It needs only a drop of blood to restore its form. Nathan's eyes sweep the battlefield. Bodies litter the ground, dozens of fallen shinobi. All Juzang has to do is claim one more corpse, and the sword will be whole again. Prepared for anything, Nathan squares his shoulders. The storm of war rages on around them, but he won't let Juzang's cursed blade regain its full strength. Not if he can help it. Nathan didn't hesitate. With a single fluid motion, he drove the broken hilt into the chest of the nearest Konoha Chunin. In an instant, a crackling energy surged up the handle, and the legend, airy decapitating broadsword sprang back to life in his hand, its blade perfectly reformed, shining with an otherworldly gleam. Rumor has it the broadsword can never be broken. Its only defining feature is its unbreakable edge. Sheathing the sword, Nathan tucked away the 100 starting coins kindly gifted by reader 130061801249002. With the broadsword restored and his purse heavier, he stepped forward, ready to meet whatever dangers lay ahead. Chapter 293, Flight and Vengeance. Nathan perched on a high branch, watching the captain's charred body smolder on the forest floor. Smoke curled upward, staining the moonlit clearing in swirling gray. Across the gap, Heichu Leia sprinted through the undergrowth, her determination burning brighter than any torch. Nathan pressed his fingers to his forehead, wincing at the sudden headache. He'd just finished off Biwa Juzo, had beaten him soundly and pinned him down. Yet before he could deliver the final blow, a new challenger appeared, convinced Nathan was vulnerable. If only they knew he was still locked in his invincible state. A faint, unsettling awareness teased at the edge of his senses, as though unseen eyes were fixing on him. He ground his teeth and made up his mind. Swiftly, he wove a series of hand seals, summoning chakra into a whirling vortex around him. At his side, the last shadow clone, previously locked in combat with a mist ninja, dissolved into wisps of vapor. As the clone vanished, his own chakra reserves roared to the surface. To any observer, it would look like he was drained, scrambling for energy. Exactly the impression Nathan wanted. He spared a quick glance at the fallen Biwa Juzo and at Heichu Leia as she closed the distance. Then, without hesitation, he leaped off the branch and slipped into the dense forest, branches snapping softly underfoot. He was gone in an instant, his escape complete. Nathan's sudden leap through the underbrush caught Heichu Leia and Biwa Juzang off guard for a heartbeat, enough time for him to vanish into the shadowed forest. Realizing their mistake, they lunged forward in pursuit, twigs snapping beneath their feet. Grinning to himself, Nathan pushed harder, feigning panic to lure them on. Unwilling to relent, Heichu Leia and Biwa Juzang surged after him, clawing back the distance. All around them, hidden in the darkness, swarms of nocturnal insects erupted from unseen crevices, harrying both hunter and hunted with frantic buzzing. Nathan didn't stop until he'd run nearly 5 kilometers. At last, he skidded to a halt on a broad, sturdy branch. Pressing his hand to the bark, he closed his eyes and stretched out his senses. A breath later, he opened his eyes and whispered, "They've really lost me, haven't they?" Over the past few days, Nathan had scoured this entire forest for any sign of the covert spy. Though he found no direct trace, the fragments of evidence he gathered revealed a vital clue. To evade the Byakugan's sight, its vision reaching about a kilometer, the enemy had to be stationed well beyond that range, using some intermediary to relay information. Barring a legendary opening jutsu like Sarutobi Hiruzen's so-called telescope technique, no shinobi could spy at such a distance unaided. Any tracking jutsu has its limits. Nathan had simply run 5, maybe 6 kilometers in one go, putting himself so far beyond his original surroundings that any lingering surveillance fell away. Now, free of prying eyes, he could move however he chose. He settled his breathing, crossed his arms, and formed the Ren hand seal. With a focused burst of chakra, he performed the shadow clone technique. In an instant, a perfect copy of himself shimmered into existence, surrounded by a swirl of smoke. Nathan offered his clone a single nod. Without hesitation, the duplicate took off along his original path, drawing attention away from the real target. Nathan himself slipped into the undergrowth, heart pounding, but voice silent, like a seasoned hunter lying in ambush. Seconds stretched on. Then came the crack of approaching footsteps. Nathan's Sharingan snapped open, the scarlet tomoe scanning every shadow and tree trunk. 2 figures emerged through the brush. Heichuleya and Biwa Juzang. No one else trailed behind them. Relieved, Nathan eased the tension in his shoulders, watching as the pair closed in on his hidden position. Nathan surged forward without a hint of hesitation. As he closed the distance, Biwa Juzang bellowed, "Who?" and swung his beheading sword eye, and a wide, deadly arc. If Nathan pressed on, the blade would cleave him in two. If he pulled back, his assault would collapse. Juzang's reflexes and battlefield instincts far outstripped those of his companion Leia, but now none of that mattered. In the next heartbeat, Nathan didn't retreat. He simply drove himself into the path of the sword. Juzang stared in stunned silence as the blade bit cleanly through Nathan's midsection, bisecting him in an instant. "Wait!" Juzang gasped. His wide-eyed horror shifted to his right hand, where the sword hilt should have been. His grip closed on empty air. The weapon had vanished. Biwa Juzang's heart thudded in his chest as he stared at his empty palm, dread twisting in his veins. Nathan's afterimage shimmered and then burst like a soap bubble, vanishing into thin air. Biwa Juzang's heart pounded as he swept his gaze across the battlefield, desperately seeking his foe. Before he could react, a cold dread seized him. With a sharp swish, Nathan reappeared and drove his straight sword in a deadly arc, slicing Juzang's carotid artery. The wound gushed blood, painting the ground in a vivid scarlet flash. Juzang staggered back, clutching his neck, as crimson life flowed free. No sooner had the blade withdrawn than Heichuleya locked onto Nathan's new position. A crackling boom split the air as twin bolts of lightning, each as thick as an arm, erupted from his paired swords. They struck the spot where Nathan had stood moments before, yet like Juzang's failed beheading strike, the bolts passed through empty air. Then came the metallic whine of another blade hurtling toward its mark, a chilling reminder that in this deadly dance, neither side was safe for a single heartbeat. Kurochi Raiga stared down at the sword hilt jutting from his chest and whispered, How is this possible?" He tried to turn, catching with the corner of his eye the unwavering figure behind him, Nathan, blood trickling from the corner of his left eye like a crimson tear. Yet it wasn't the wound that froze Raiga's gaze, it was Nathan's eyes. Jet black with a ringed pattern, they burned like a dark sun. Raiga's breath hitched. What is that?" He'd never seen a Mangekyo Sharingan before, but ignorance didn't stop him from one last desperate strike. "Lightning release, thunder burial," he roared. Raiga thrust both swords into the earth and poured every ounce of chakra into them, sacrificing himself to fuel the jutsu. A thunderous crack split the jungle night, and a blinding bolt of lightning erupted from his thunderblade, Ya, consuming him in a torrent of white-hot energy. The blast rippled outward, carving a scorched circle 100 meters across. Trees split and smoldered, undergrowth turned to ash, nothing within its path remained. When the lightning died away, all that was left was blackened earth and shattered silence. 100 meters away, Nathan suddenly shimmered into view. He pressed his hand to his left eye, wincing as fresh pain flared, then surveyed the scorched battlefield with his uninjured right eye, his jaw tight with tension. The enemy's final strike had been terrifying in its ferocity. Only by invoking heaven's control to seize a fleeting state of invincibility had he avoided severe injury. Then again, without heaven's control as his foundation, he never would have dared such a desperate gamble. Chapter 294. At last, they appear. The brilliance of the lightning flash faded, and Nathan stepped back onto the scorched earth. Before him lay the charred husk of Heichuleya. His body was blackened like charcoal, more ravaged than even the captain he'd killed earlier. Nathan allowed himself a grim nod. "I suppose this counts as revenge for him," he murmured. Turning away, he scanned the battlefield for Biwa Juzang. At first the figure looked still, but then Nathan spotted subtle signs of a struggle. A few feet away, a twisted form lay half-buried in ash. Biwa Juzang had made a desperate run for it after Nathan severed his carotid artery. Nathan couldn't help but admire that fierce will to survive. But no matter how strong one's spirit, if the body is mortally wounded, hope goes up in smoke. Then Nathan paused. Something didn't feel right. He frowned and began to search the ground more thoroughly. Where were the two blades? Both the thunder blade Ya that Heichuleya had wielded and the broken blade beheading sword from Biwa Juzang were gone. Not a single fragment remained. Nathan's brow knit in puzzlement as he scanned the ashen field. Had someone else come through while he was distracted, or had one of his fallen foes managed to conceal their weapon at the last possible moment? He crouched and ran a gloved hand over the scorched earth, looking for any shred of metal or identifiable marking. But the ground was disturbingly clean. No blade, no debris, nothing. Nathan rose slowly, senses prickling. The eerie silence pressed in around him, broken only by the faint crackle of smoldering embers. Whoever had taken those weapons was still out there. And now, with two of the deadliest swords in play, Nathan knew the real hunt was only just beginning. Nathan had intended to use two of the 7 ninja swords, especially the thunder-infused Twin Fang, as temporary weapons until he claimed the Kusanagi sword. To his surprise, both blades vanished. Frustrated, he sifted through the memories of his past life, recalling every detail he knew about the legendary swords. Then it struck him. Mangetsu Kazuki, the second-generation wielder of the Twin Fang, had owned a scroll capable of summoning all 7 blades. Nathan had always assumed Mangetsu himself had forged that scroll later in life, given his unparalleled skill with every sword. Now he realized the scroll must have existed alongside the weapons from the very beginning, only passing into Mangetsu's hands at a later date. After all, when Might Guy shattered the original 7 ninja swordsmen into the 3 great blades, 4 of the legendary swords were already lost. So without a pre-existing summoning scroll, there could never have been a second generation of swordsmen. Nathan frowned as he pieced together the puzzle of the 7 ninja swords. How had Mangetsu Kazuki come to master every blade in the arsenal? Rumor had it that after the Mist Shinobi's slaughter, the 3 survivors had run off and collected their fallen comrades' swords, but that made no sense. Each of them had been so thoroughly broken by Might Guy's onslaught that they'd fled in terrified disarray. Who, in that state of mind, would calmly go scavenging for weapons? No, the truth was far simpler and far more intriguing. The swords were bound by summoning scrolls that reacted the moment their owner fell. In other words, as soon as a wielder died, their blade vanished back to its scroll, unless someone actively called it forth. That explained why, when Kuroki Raiga and Biwa Juzo met their ends, their swords disappeared without a trace. But Momochi Zabuza's rebroken blade, slashing fang, never returned after Kakashi struck it down. Nathan tapped his fingers against his leg, thinking it through. The only explanation was that Mangetsu Kazuki, the scroll's true master, had seized it in his final moments. He must have borne the scroll to his grave, denying the hidden mist its chance to reclaim Zabuza's blade. A frustrating, yet fitting end. What a pity, Nathan murmured under his breath. Before he could ather his thoughts, a shadow detached itself from the darkness beside him. Someone had silently appeared. Nathan's hand slid to the hilt of his kunai as the newcomer's presence sent a chill down his spine. It had been Nathan's shadow clone that drew their enemies deep into the ruins earlier. There was no hurry to dispel the shadow clone technique. its doppelganger could finish cleaning up the battlefield while he slipped away. Holding his breath, Nathan melted into the shadows, deliberately distancing himself from the main fray. Hidden from view, he prepared to unleash heaven's control and settle matters with Kuroki Raiga and Biwa Juzo once and for all. At the same time, he hoped to bait out the stranger stalking him and Uchiha Shisui. There was no doubt the enemy would pursue him if given the chance, and that pursuit was exactly what he wanted. Seconds crawled by. Almost a full minute passed before a swarm of minute, sesame-sized insects drifted into view. The shadow clone, stationed on the battlefield, detected nothing unusual. But Nathan, crouched in darkness, kept his senses razor-sharp. Even the slightest movement would not escape his notice. Though the insects were tiny, they immediately caught Nathan's attention. He knew that, despite their lack of intellect, bugs possess an uncanny sensitivity to danger. Moments ago, Haichuleia's thunder release, Thunder Burial, had unleashed earth-shaking force, yet these creatures neither scattered nor fled. In fact, they hadn't even stirred of their own accord. That only deepened his suspicions. Nathan closed his eyes, extending his chakra senses, and probed the area. Within seconds, he pinpointed the anomaly. Though small and faint in presence, these insects vibrated with vitality far beyond that of ordinary bugs. Even more telling, he detected a whisper of chakra pulsing through their tiny bodies. There was no mistaking it. These weren't random pests, but the cultivated parasites of the Aburame clan, the famed insect emissaries of Konoha. If his memory served, Danzo once commanded an Aburame shinobi. Aburame Ryoma? Nathan allowed himself a silent moment to weigh the possibility. He had only these few bugs as evidence, and his real target lay hidden somewhere beyond. Carefully stifling his breath, he melted deeper into the shadows, prepared to wait and watch until the true enemy revealed himself. Nathan's shadow clone finished scouring the battlefield and paused to look around. Finding nothing of interest, it melted back into the main fighting grounds, followed at a measured pace by a swarm of tiny reconnaissance bugs. The two armies had already withdrawn, yet Nathan himself stayed behind. If the stranger in the shadows truly belonged to Root, he wouldn't pass up a chance to comb the field for fallen ninja. Those bodies spoke volumes to trained eyes. Earlier, Nathan hadn't been able to risk an overt presence. Here, with the crowds thinned out, it was safe to linger. He crouched in the gloom, patient. Only 2 or 3 minutes passed before 5 figures cloaked in black robes and masks slipped into view. A thrill ran through Nathan. He couldn't hide the eerie curve of his lips. "Who's there?" one of them barked, then flung a kunai at the point where Nathan crouched. Ding! The sharp ring of metal on metal cut through the air. A sharp whistle cut through the quiet forest as a kunai flew from behind a thick oak, aiming straight for Nathan's back. With a swift twist of his wrist, he knocked the blade aside, sending it clattering against the tree trunk. From the same shadowed spot, a small figure emerged into the dappled sunlight. "Uchiha Nathan?" One of the 5 lurking shinobi breathed, eyes widening in surprise. Indeed, it was him, Nathan Uchiha, the rising star of the village. He studied the group before him, the edge of his mouth curling into a confident smile. "So it was you who've been trailing me these past few days," Nathan said, voice calm but carrying an unmistakable challenge. "Spying from the treetops like frightened birds. Tell me, who are you, and what do you want?" The 5 exchanged uneasy glances. No words came. Then, without warning, they scattered into a loose circle around Nathan, kunai at the ready and determination burning in their eyes. The forest fell silent once more, waiting for the next move. Chapter 295, Quick Decision. Nathan stood perfectly still as a squad of root ninjas closed in around him. They showed him no courtesy. The moment their circle tightened, each raised a hand to weave the seals of the sealing array. Normally, casting the general sealing array solo required 4 pre-made sealing talismans, ideal for a hidden trap. But with 4 ninjas pooling their chakra, no talismans were needed. Anyone caught inside the formation would be bound instantly. Evidently, they meant to strike first. They underestimated Nathan's reflexes. Just as their fingers twisted into the final seal, he took a single, decisive step forward. His form blurred into a trailing shadow, and in the next heartbeat he was standing behind one of the nearest ninjas. In one fluid motion, his short sword, a sleek, deadly serpent of steel, thrust upward, piercing the man's heart. The ninja fell without a sound. Root operatives might not fear death, but they refused to perish meaninglessly. With one of their number down, the remaining ninjas hesitated. Nathan used the pause to vanish into the underbrush, leaving them to question whether they had just witnessed a fatal miscalculation or the arrival of a far more dangerous opponent. Nathan's mind raced. Even if he forced the sealing jutsu now, there was no way he and his teammates could complete the sealing array before he fell. Swallowing his pride, he broke the hand seals and sprang back to safety. Yet, for some inexplicable reason, his retreat stuttered. He hesitated for a single heartbeat. A faint poochie snapped through the air, sounding unnervingly loud in the tense forest. The root operative under the mask froze. His hand flew to his chest, where a short sword, Nathan's blade, jutted out. He stared down in shock. "What?" he breathed. Confusion warred with pain as he struggled to understand what had happened. Then his eyes lifted to Nathan's crimson Sharingan. In that instant, the truth struck him. At the very moment he drew his blade, Nathan had activated the phantom sword technique. The illusion had slowed his perception just enough that his own strike arrived too late, piercing himself instead of Nathan. In a battle between masters, opportunities vanish in the blink of an eye. That single, fatal hesitation was all Nathan needed. The masked ninja's knees buckled, and he crumpled to the forest floor, silence swallowing his final gasp. Nathan straightened, eyes still blazing scarlet, and pressed on toward the next threat. Swish! Nathan drew his short sword in a single, fluid motion, deflecting a hail of kunai and shuriken from the remaining root operatives. In the same instant, the nearest ninja, a shadowy figure barely visible in the gloom, triggered a hidden explosive tag on his person. It was a suicide move meant to take Nathan with him. But through the crimson whirl of his Sharingan, Nathan saw the detonation coming and rolled aside just in time. Boom! A fireball blossomed, banishing the cavern's darkness in a roaring wave of heat and light. Nathan rose from the dirt, the glow reflecting off his blade. He swept a quick glance over the other root shinobi. There was no shock, no fury at the loss of their comrade, only a cold, empty detachment, as if they were nothing more than mission parameters to be met or discarded. "They're just tools," he murmured, shifting his stance. More kunai flew at him. With a couple of deft swipes, he knocked them harmlessly aside. He'd already eliminated one opponent, but these remaining operatives were clearly prepared to press their advantage. Keeping them at bay with swordplay alone would be a fight to the death. Unless... Nathan lifted his left hand and touched the corner of his eye, where the red iris of his Sharingan pulsed with power. He felt chakra coiling in his chest, ready to be unleashed. The air around him seemed to still, anticipation crackling like static. Now, he could end this on his terms. Nathan knew that without unleashing Heaven's Guard, he couldn't quickly overpower all of them. Yet, he'd already relied on Heaven's Guard several times tonight, and each use sapped his strength and threatened to rob him of his left eye's sight. He hadn't forgotten how Sasuke, in his rush to exploit the Manjikyo's power, had pushed his eyes beyond their limit and paid a terrible price. Nathan was determined not to suffer the same fate. Still, he couldn't afford to hesitate. The longer he tangled with these root operatives, the greater the chance they'd slip away or pass along intelligence he couldn't afford to leak. His chakra reserves were already perilously low, too unstable for a drawn-out fight. Weighing his dwindling options, Nathan opted for a swift, decisive strike, hoping to end the conflict before his body gave out. As for his eyesight, he reminded himself that by his calculations, he had at most 2 to 3 years before his Manjikyo Sharingan would mature and restore what he risked tonight. By now, Nathan knew he had to end this before his eyesight failed him entirely. He charged headlong into a cluster of root operatives, blades drawn. They didn't hesitate. Several shinobi sprang forward, and in an instant steel met steel. Clang, clink. The ring of short sword against kunai echoed through the clearing. Nathan had resolved to hold back his trump card, the Heavenly Guardian, until the fatal moment, enough to deflect any killing blow, then sweep in for the counterstrike. To unleash it recklessly would be a waste of chakra and a glaring signal to any enemy prepared to counter. As one root ninja pressed a downward slash against him, Nathan's Sharingan swept to attention. With a sudden focus, the three swirling tome collapsed inward, his pupils flaring black like a dark sun. In that heartbeat, he triggered the Mangekyo Sharingan, and the battlefield shifted in his gaze. Nathan's newly awakened Mangekyo Sharingan granted him razor-sharp insight. He watched with cold amusement as the two root operatives before him gaped in astonishment. Neither had any idea why his eyes had changed, nor what that change portended. And now, they never would. Rather than waste time activating Heaven's Guard, Nathan simply raised a hand. With a swift flick of his wrist, he cast Genjutsu Sharingan on the first ninja, yanking his mind into a vivid illusion. At the same moment, the hypnotic power of his Sharingan locked the second ninja in place, his body frozen under Nathan's gaze. Whoosh! Two kunai sprang from Nathan's fingers, hurling through the air toward the immobilized shinobi. Before the blades could find their marks, Nathan wove the seals for Heaven's Guard. His form shimmered into an orb of translucent light, and then vanished from the ninja world entirely. Behind him, one desperate root agent lunged, thrusting a kunai through the spot where Nathan had stood. His blade met only illusion. Heart-pounding, he spun in a frantic circle, eyes sweeping for any sign of the missing shinobi. Then, without warning, a sudden chill skittered down his spine, making every hair on his neck stand at attention. Without hesitation, the root ninja grabbed the kunai by its blade and swung it in a backward arc. In his peripheral vision, he spotted Nathan standing just behind him, dagger raised at his throat. Thank goodness I'm not too late, he thought. In that instant, the kunai passed clean through what appeared to be Nathan's body, only a clever illusion. Before the ninja could recover, Nathan's real dagger flashed out, cutting across his neck with deadly precision. Chapter 296, Swish! The kunai sliced through flesh with a wet crack, and a geyser of blood bloomed into the air. The root ninja clutched his neck, staggered back, eyes wide in shock, his face a mask of confusion. Nathan said nothing. He merely drew another kunai from his belt and flung it straight at the man's heart. The first kunai had seemingly passed through Nathan's chest until the root ninja realized why it hadn't struck true. At the critical moment, Nathan had activated his secret technique, Heaven's Guard, phasing himself out of the ninja world entirely. The root ninja's reflexes simply couldn't track the near-instantaneous shift. In his vision, Nathan's afterimage lingered, creating the illusion that the blade had passed harmlessly through his body. It looked eerily like Uchiha Obito's Kamui, yet the resemblance ended there. Obito's technique merely transports his body into the Kamui dimension, where injuries can still occur. Heaven's Guard, by contrast, lifts Nathan completely out of reality for a heartbeat. Absolute invulnerability. This time, there was no escaping. The second kunai pierced true, and the root ninja slumped to the ground, crimson pooling beneath him. Nathan retrieved his blades, turned, and vanished as silently as he had appeared. Nathan knew that while his eye technique was active, he was completely impervious to harm. His Heaven's Guard ability clearly surpassed his opponent's power, though they shared similar foundations. But great power came with a price. The technique lasted only a few seconds. Originally, it could hold for no more than 10 seconds. Thanks to his recent training and improved ocular control, it now stretched to about 13 seconds. It was still fleeting, but ample for dispatching standard ninjas. As he just demonstrated, sometimes all it took was a momentary activation. Bang, bang, bang! 3 heavy thuds echoed in quick succession. Behind Nathan, the root ninja whose carotid artery he'd severed finally collapsed, blood darkening the ground beneath him. The 2 fixed targets he'd neutralized moments earlier crumpled to the earth as well. Now, only one root operative remained standing on the battlefield. Nathan looked up, his gaze fixed on the figure before him, Ryoma Aburame, his dark clothing swarming with those parasitic insects. "You're Ryoma Aburame, aren't you?" Even behind his mask and sunglasses, Nathan could sense Ryoma's surprise. Root operatives thrived in anonymity, but careful investigation often yielded clues. After all, Uchiha Shisui had already tipped Nathan off to odd movements within the Aburame clan, enough to suspect they'd make their play during this support mission. Still, naming Ryoma so precisely was nothing to take lightly. Root's mind control conditioning, the infamous tongue seal oath, ensured their loyalty until Danzo's death. Betrayal was supposed to be impossible, and yet here was Ryoma, clearly unsettled that Nathan knew him. A tense silence stretched between them before Ryoma finally broke it. "How did you know?" Nathan allowed a faint, knowing smile to crease his lips. "It wasn't that hard," he trailed off, then leaned in closer, the glow of quiet confidence in his eyes. Nathan drove off the ground with both feet, propelling himself forward like a launched arrow. In an instant, he closed the distance to Aburame Ryoma. His blade sang through the air. Nathan's sword sliced clean across Ryoma's throat, but to his surprise, no blood spurted. The figure in front of him wavered and shattered into a writhing mass of insects. "Insect clone," Nathan murmured, cocking his head as he scanned the battleground. Before him, the first swarm of insects scattered. Behind him, another cluster of bugs swirled and reformed into Ryoma's likeness. The real Aburame Ryoma's cold eyes gleamed as he pressed his palms together. "Secret technique, insect jade," Ryoma intoned. At once, the two insect swarms, one Nathan had just destroyed, the other lying in ambush, flew toward him and merged into a living net. The mass of chitinous bodies billowed, closing in like an endless pulsing trap. Nathan felt the insect's thousands of legs ripple through the air, ready to entangle and consume him. There was no time to hesitate. With every ounce of strength, Nathan sprang backward, narrowly escaping the crushing tide of insects. His heart thundered in his chest as he landed, sword at the ready. Ryoma's net of insects hovered ominously between them, waiting to ensnare its prey. Nathan steadied his breath. The real battle was only just beginning. Nathan raised his left hand, snapped the seal in an instant, and shouted his ninjutsu. Fire style, great fireball technique. A colossal sphere of flame roared into existence and crashed into the writhing swarm of insects. Immediately, the air filled with a chilling chorus of skittering and gnawing, as though countless mandibles were chewing through solid rock. When the fireball finally collapsed, Nathan peered through the smoke. To his surprise, the swarm had hardly thinned at all. He understood why in the next heartbeat. These weren't ordinary insects, but parasitic bugs that thrived on chakra. His great fireball, while blazing with heat, was essentially a condensed ball of chakra, the perfect banquet for such creatures. No wonder he'd heard that sickening crunch as it struck. The bugs had been feasting on his jutsu. Shaking off the realization, Nathan refocused on his mission. The fireball had done its job, scattering the insects enough to break their formation. Spotting Aburame Ryoma just beyond the gap, he surged forward, determination blazing in his eyes. Nathan's Mangekyo Sharingan was locked on Ryoma, tracking his every twitch. Sensing Nathan's watchful gaze, the Aburame Shinobi raised his hand once more. In a heartbeat, dozens of chakra-infused insects swarmed to his command. He leveled a single finger at Nathan and murmured the incantation for a forbidden clan jutsu, the insect disruption tool. This secret Aburame technique forces parasitic bugs to vibrate their wings at a precisely tuned frequency. The resulting hum interferes with an opponent's sensory perception, obliterating stealthy movements, scrambling incoming ninjutsu, even clouding the sharpest of eyes. Ryoma had noticed something new in Nathan's reactions ever since he activated his Mangekyo. The Uchiha's insight had leapt forward, granting him uncanny speed in reading attacks. To conceal himself, Ryoma needed to blunt that advantage. As the insects took to the air, their wings beating in thunderous unison, Nathan felt his focus slip away. The relentless drone hammered at his ears, each vibration blurring the world around him. His heightened perception, once honed to a razor's edge, dulled, and for the first time he struggled to follow Ryoma's movements. Nathan's vision blurred beneath the writhing mass of insects, their sheer numbers disrupting his Mangekyo Sharingan's clarity. If he stayed locked in this struggle, he'd be forced to rely on nothing but wits and bravery to break through, and risk his opponent fleeing the moment he faltered. "I was hoping to save some eye power," he murmured through gritted teeth, "but I guess that ship sailed." He straightened, determination hardening his gaze. Glimpsing Aburame Ryoma's form lurking just beyond the insect swarm, Nathan silently activated his trademark jutsu, Sky Control. In an instant, his body dissolved into the air. Where'd he go?" Ryoma's voice cracked with alarm. He'd only ever seen Nathan use Sky Control for a fleeting second, never long enough to vanish completely. Now, confronted with empty space, he panicked. Instantly, he He deployed an insect clone to shroud his own presence and hurled commands at the swarm, urging them to pinpoint Nathan's aura. What Ryoma didn't realize was that Nathan had foreseen every desperate move. Hidden from sight, he watched the insects obey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Nathan wasted no time. He located his fallen body in an instant, summoned his heavenly guardian, and reappeared directly before Aburame Ryoma. The impact of his sudden arrival stole the Shinobi's breath away. Ryoma, usually ice-cold, stammered, "You?" But he never got to finish. With a flash of scarlet, Nathan activated his Sharingan Genjutsu. In the blink of an eye, Ryoma's mind was dragged into a seamless illusion, leaving his real self defenseless and trapped. Nathan held Aburame Ryoma firmly under his control, but he made no move to kill him. Instead, he lifted the mask concealing Ryoma's face. Though Nathan had never met him, the unmistakable purple mark at the corner of Ryoma's mouth proved his identity beyond doubt. Wasting no time, Nathan wove a series of hand seals and unleashed his Manjikyo Sharingan in a powerful genjutsu designed to sift through Ryoma's memories. Despite Ryoma's iron will and formidable mental defenses, Nathan's ocular technique overwhelmed him. Memories began to pour into Nathan's mind, but the excavation was far from complete. All across Ryoma's recollections, intricate curse seals blocked Nathan's vision. The most notorious of these was known as the Tongue Trouble Eradication Seal, a ward specifically crafted to hide every detail relating to Danzo. Under its influence, any thought of Danzo simply vanished from view, and no words about him could be forced out. Nathan caught glimpses of Ryoma's missions, the strange insects of the Aburame clan, covert rendezvous, and even the raw fury burning behind Ryoma's violet eyes. Yet every time he approached a memory tied to Danzo, the seal snapped shut like iron shutters. Frustrated but undeterred, Nathan knew he would have to find another way to penetrate those cursed defenses. Nathan knew that many of Root's operations were classified at the highest level, sealed away so no outsider could access their details. All he could recover were a few disjointed fragments, the exact coordinates of General Gen's headquarters in Konoha, the internal layout of its corridors, and a few other structural notes. Those tidbits might prove useful down the line, but for now they offered little clarity. He shook his head and tucked them into the recesses of his memory. What he really needed was to understand the mission he'd been assigned. Focusing his will, Nathan reached back into the source's mind once more. Because this operation was still in progress, its memories hadn't been fully locked away, and new information flowed to him quickly. As he'd suspected, the figure who'd been shadowing him over the past few days was indeed a Root Shinobi. More precisely, one of Root's most accomplished infiltrators. Through the recovered memories, Nathan learned that the operative had been using a reconnaissance ninjutsu called Secret Technique Destruction Bug to monitor his every move. It was clear, whoever this agent was, they were as skilled as they were dangerous. Nathan frowned as he analyzed the data. Originally, this technique's detection range had been limited to just a few hundred meters, but after the latest enhancements, it now reached 2 to 3 kilometers. No wonder neither his Sharingan nor the Hyuga clan's Byakugan could pick it up. Such long-distance surveillance was unheard of. What made it even more insidious was how they'd prepared for it. Thanks to Orochimaru's cooperation, they'd obtained the general route of his team's journey and discreetly planted chakra-leaking sensors, bugs, along the way. Concealed among the terrain, those sensors were virtually undetectable. Had the ninjutsu worked independently, Nathan might have mastered it on his own. But this powerful reconnaissance jutsu only activated in tandem with the parasitic tagging technique, keeping its full potential locked behind that prerequisite. Shaking his head, Nathan plunged deeper into his subject's memories. Anger flared across his face as he sifted through layer after layer of concealed thoughts. Finally, he saw it clearly. This entire mission had been commissioned directly by Danzo. Worse yet, the conspirators had laid the groundwork months ago. Their original timeline was derailed only when Iwagakure's frontline offensive intensified dramatically. With the battlefield in chaos, and Orochimaru refusing to proceed under such unstable conditions, the plan had been postponed, but never abandoned. Nathan breathed a quiet sigh of relief. The entire operation had been postponed, thankfully. If it had gone ahead, he'd have been forced to activate his Manj, Kyo Sharingan, far too early, and dealing with tonight's lineup of Miss Shinobi would have been all but impossible. He flipped open his notebook and added another note addressed to Danzo. He hadn't anticipated Orochimaru's involvement in this affair. Then again, Orochimaru was still officially a root shinobi under Danzo's command and bound to follow certain orders. On the battlefield in the Land of Rain, Nathan served as Konoha's commander-in-chief. Without Orochimaru's cooperation, he couldn't have mobilized two of the village's most formidable jonin, himself included, alongside Uchiha Shisui. It made sense, then, that Orochimaru would take part. Nathan closed his notebook after scribbling a brief message requesting Orochimaru's support. Still, this ambush in Kirigakure seemed to have little to do with him. Faceless, Nathan whispered, his gaze sharpening. According to Aburame Ryoma's report, the plans for this ambush had been relayed to Kirigakure by a root operative known only as No Face. But who, or what, was No Face? Nathan leaned back, mind already racing through every possibility. Aburame Ryoma didn't have much to offer. All she knew was that the man before her was a root operative who'd broken into a sealed vault deep within Kirigakure, and that his rank was unusually high. Nathan paused, closing his eyes as he sifted through her memories. In the end, there was nothing more of value. Even a master of mental ninjutsu like the head of the Mountain Clan would struggle to pry deeper. Accepting the limitation, Nathan withdrew his focus and formed a swift hand seal. Chakra absorption technique. In the next instant, surplus chakra bled from Ryoma's body, funneled along Nathan's meridians and refilled his own reserves. Ah! Outside the illusion, Ryoma gasped in pain, her body tensing as the chakra was drawn away, but her mind remained firmly ensnared. The perfected Genjutsu Sharingan, empowered by the Mangekyo Sharingan, left no room for escape once fully unleashed. Nathan watched impassively as Aburame Ryoma's body went limp. Mere seconds earlier, he'd locked onto his target's chakra network and unleashed his draining jutsu. In less than 20 seconds, Ryoma's life, his chakra, his mental focus, even his physical strength, was siphoned away. He collapsed with barely a sound. Nathan released his grip, and Ryoma's corpse thudded heavily to the ground. Before any onlookers could react, Nathan sealed his next hand signs and roared, "Katon, Gokakyu no Jutsu." A towering fireball erupted from his mouth, swallowing the body in searing flames until nothing remained but charred ash. He moved down the line with ruthless efficiency. Every root operative in sight fell to the same pattern. Chakras drained, bodies reduced to embers. Kuroki Raiga and Biwa Juzo fared no better. In under a minute, Nathan had wiped out the entire squad. Satisfied, he turned to vanish into the shadows. Then something caught his eye. The Sharingan orb in his palm pulsed faintly, reflecting dozens of tiny, iridescent insects buzzing overhead. Aburame clan bugs. Their life was bound by a contract, yes, but they drew chakra independently. Killing Ryoma had done nothing to stop them. Nathan frowned and squared his shoulders. The battle wasn't over yet. Nathan knew that even without a handler's chakra, these parasitic insects would eventually starve and die, but he refused to take the chance. If any Aburame clan shinobi recovered them, they could pry secrets out of the bugs. Better to eliminate every last one. Stripped of their master's control, the insects scattered instinctively, easy targets. Nathan formed the familiar hand seals, channeled chakra, and unleashed fire-style, great fireball technique. Booms of searing flame rippled across the clearing, and within moments, every visible parasite lay incinerated. He surveyed the silent battlefield, its grounds still smoldering in the flickering light. Satisfied, Nathan offered a single nod, then turned and walked away without looking back. Chapter 298, End. On the main battlefield, Muri Jinpachi and Uchiha Shisui were locked in fierce combat when Muri spotted a familiar figure stepping out of the tree line. His heart skipped a beat. Not long ago, Black Ho Leia and Loquat Juzang had driven this opponent, Nathan, off the field. And now he was back. Muri broke away from Shisui and backed off immediately. He glanced toward the forest behind Nathan, but saw no sign of Black Ho or Loquat. Anticipating the worst, Muri didn't hesitate. He drew a whistle from his sleeve, pressed it to his lips, and blew with all his might. The shrill, rhythmic blast cut through the din of battle, freezing every mist ninja in its path. They exchanged worried glances before abandoning their allies from Konoha and slipping quietly away into the shadows. On the battlefield, several Konoha shinobi watched in disbelief and anger as their former allies melted back into the mist. Uchiha Shisui had been ready to give chase to the fleeing shinobi, but he held everyone back with a single wave of his hand. Lowering his chakra to a calm, measured flow, Shisui strode straight to Nathan and demanded, "Where are the two who were trailing you?" Shisui had seen it for himself. Black Raiga and Juzo had driven Nathan off the battlefield. Yet before Nathan could even glance back, he spoke in a matter-of-fact tone. "They're dead." Shisui stiffened. He'd half expected this answer the moment he'd spotted those two closing in on Nathan, but hearing it confirmed still left him reeling. It wasn't that Nathan had ever given him reason to doubt his honesty. Shisui knew that if anyone couldn't lie under scrutiny, it was Nathan, but the sheer improbability of it was staggering. Nathan had already cut down a dozen Kirigakure special jonin in a single sweep. He'd slain a notoriously formidable Kuya clan jonin at first sight, then dispatched several more Kirigakure jonin without breaking a sweat. And now, here lay Black Raiga and Juzo, shinobi whose reputations matched that of Muri Jinpachi, both killed before they even realized what hit them. Shisui realized with a jolt of both awe and alarm that Nathan's power far outstripped the jonin level. How had he done it? And more importantly, what would come next? Shisui's heart skipped a beat. Don't tell me. He recalled the ancient clan records, tattered scrolls that spoke of the Sharingan's power extending beyond 3 Tomoe. A rarer, more fearsome form, the Mangekyo Sharingan. Dread and excitement coiled in his chest as he dared to look deeper, straight into Nathan's unflinching gaze. Nathan regarded him coolly, as though nothing were amiss. Shisui sensed a subtle weight behind those dark eyes, a pressure that teased the edge of his consciousness, but not one note in the old texts had warned of absolute domination. Was he simply on edge? He shook his head, trying to banish the thought. Is something wrong? Shisui asked, his voice quieter than he intended. Nathan blinked, as if surprised by the question. What's up? Shisui forced a shake of his head. Nothing. He swept his gaze over the ravaged battlefield, pausing to acknowledge the bodies of their fallen captain and lieutenant. Their uniforms lay stained and torn, their faces frozen in the last moments of battle. Steeling himself, he turned back to Nathan. All right, what's our next move? Nathan let out a low groan and surveyed the field with a pained expression. Where do we even start? He ran a hand through his hair, lips pressed into a grim line as he prepared to chart their course through the chaos. Nathan surveyed the wounded Konoha shinobi and said, Take a few minutes to recover. We'll move on as soon as you're ready. Uchiha Shisui frowned. Pressing on now? Doesn't that leave us exposed? There could be enemies lurking in the shadows. Shisui's concern was valid. The mist ninjas they'd just driven off were only the obvious threat. Hidden reconnaissance teams might be waiting to strike. Nathan nodded. You're right. Let's rest here. In the meantime, I'll make sure no Oma's sneaking up on us. He stood, brought his hands to seal a quick sign, and released the shadow clone technique. In a swirl of misty chakra, Nathan's figure dissolved. Shisui's eyes went wide. He barely whispered, A shadow clone? Indeed, the Nathan standing before them was merely an illusion, a decoy Nathan had dispatched earlier to draw Aburame Ryoma and the others away. The real Nathan was still making his way toward their position. Shisui couldn't help but feel chagrined at his own previous confidence. Even a clone's Sharingan exuded a force so powerful it left him questioning everything. Uchiha Shisui's breath hitched as he watched the spot where his opponent once stood. If the original shows up, how could Nathan ever hope to repay me? He wondered, alarm coursing through his veins. Could it be he's actually awakened the legendary Mangekyo Sharingan? Deep in the forest, Nathan was sprinting back to camp when he abruptly skidded to a halt. A rush of images, snapshots from his recently dispelled shadow clone, flooded his mind. Flipping through those memories, he realized with growing concern that Shisui must have noticed the clone's sudden disappearance. No wonder his suspicions were soaring. Yet there'd been no mistake. Nathan had created that shadow clone before Aburame Ryoma and the others arrived, so it knew nothing of the reinforcements on his side. Its sole mission had been to draw attention away, and once it succeeded, it self-dissolved exactly as planned. Now, by reviewing its final impressions, Nathan could piece together the latest intelligence from the main battlefield, assuming, of course, that nothing had gone wrong in the interim. With this technique, Nathan could even siphon off a fallen enemy's chakra mid-battle, turning a dire situation into an unexpected advantage. Naturally, Uchiha Shisui had taken notice. Anyone familiar with the Sharingan would question how Nathan seemed to recover and endure far beyond normal limits. But until Shisui openly confronted him, those doubts remained idle whispers. And now that Nathan's strength had grown, baseless rumors posed no real threat. Having gathered every scrap of intelligence he could, Nathan wasted no time. He launched himself forward, feet churning the earth, and raced toward the main battlefield. A few minutes later, he arrived just as Shisui was rallying the surviving Konoha shinobi, directing them to secure the area and tend to the wounded. Nathan scanned the ranks and felt a sinking dread. Fewer than half of the original force remained. The team's captain and vice-captain had fallen in combat. 7 of the 10 special jonin were gone, and of the 56 chunin who'd set out that morning, only 23 stood ready to fight on. The cost had been steep, and the battle was far from over. By the time the dust settled, only 28 of them remained alive, including Nathan and Uchiha Shisui. Their original 70-man squad had lost 42 comrades. Nathan couldn't deny a stab of regret at the cost, but he'd expected nothing less. These mist shinobi were simply too powerful. He had done everything in his power to sap their strength, but every time he struck a blow, he was cut off and delayed. The moment he was embroiled in counterattacks, the enemy capitalized on their numerical and qualitative advantage, overwhelming the Konoha ninjas and inflicting devastating losses. Yet Nathan's efforts had not been in vain. The mist forces had paid dearly for every step they pressed forward. A quick reckoning in his mind told him that of the over 100 shinobi who'd ambushed and surrounded them, a similar number lay dead or wounded. The fallen chunin, though elite, could be replaced, but the loss of jonin would leave a far deeper wound in Kirigakure's ranks. Such costly casualties would echo through their ranks for a long time, just as the memory of this battle would haunt Nathan and those few left standing. Chapter 299, Aftermath and a New Beginning. You're back. The instant Nathan reappeared, Uchiha Shisui dropped his tools and hurried over. Nathan gave a curt nod and ignored Shisui's curious stare. How are things? Shisui's expression turned grave. Not good. Everyone's injured. They're in no shape to keep going. Nathan frowned. I'm hurt, too. He opened his chakra menu and scanned his medical ninjutsu. Healing technique, Lavar 5. Palm healing art, Lolv 7. 19,490 20,000. Chakra scalpel, Love 5. 5,000. With those 3 techniques, Nathan could fully heal most physical wounds, and luckily, most of the Konoha shinobi had only suffered trauma from ninja tools. While damage inflicted by powerful jutsu might not mend completely, he could at least stabilize their injuries so they could keep moving. Closing the menu, Nathan strode toward the nearest wounded shinobi, determination shining in his eyes. It was time to turn the tide, for them and for the mission ahead. Nathan approached swiftly. The injured Konoha chunin looked up at him, voice barely more than a rasp. Captain. Nathan nodded once and crouched beside him, eyes narrowing as he assessed the damage. Stay still, he ordered, quickly forming a hand seal. Chakra coalesced around Nathan's right palm, sharpening into a translucent scalpel. Guided by the Sharingan's insight, he deftly excised the necrotic tissue from the chunin's wounds. The faint whisper of chakra sliced through damaged flesh without drawing a drop of fresh blood. As soon as the area was clean, Nathan shifted to another seal and gathered a sphere of yang-released chakra in his palm. He pressed it against the deepest gash, sending a wave of numbing warmth through the chunin's leg. The young shinobi's muscles twitched, but remembering Nathan's warning, he bit back any movement and held steady. Satisfied, Nathan repeated the process, sealing each injury with an injected chakra sphere until all the wounds were purged and stabilized. When the last pulse of energy drained into the chunin's flesh, Nathan rose to his feet. Good, he murmured, brushing dust from his sleeve. Now rest. You'll recover faster if you keep still. With that, he turned and strode toward the next fallen comrade, ready to do it all again. Nathan's latest move left even Uchiha Shisui astonished. He hurried forward, eyes bright with curiosity. "Nathan," he called, "that was the palm immortal technique you just used, right? Why did it look different from everyone else's?" Nathan remained calm. "The standard version heals too slowly. I've upgraded it. Faster recovery, more efficient." Shisui let out an impressed whistle. "You're amazing," Nathan shrugged. "It just cost me a lot more chakra." He hesitated for a heartbeat, then turned to Shisui with a serious expression. "You should get ready, too." Shisui frowned. "Ready for what?" Nathan activated his Sharingan and studied Shisui's abdomen. "I'm about to heal the others, but my chakra won't stretch far enough. I'll need you to contribute some of yours." "Chakra? Mine?" Shisui's eyes widened. He remembered how Nathan had drawn chakra from the Mist Ninja in their last fight. Clearly, Nathan's new jutsu could siphon life energy, and he was going to use it on him next. Still, Shisui felt no fear. He simply nodded, bracing himself for whatever was to come. Nathan smiled, genuinely glad to help. "No problem," he said, nodding firmly. "I'll refine as much chakra as I can." He noticed there was no hesitation in Uchiha Shisui's voice, and a spark of admiration flickered in his mind. This kind of selflessness was precisely the will of fire, spirit that burned at the heart of Konoha. Though Nathan himself had little interest in lofty doctrines, he couldn't help but respect such wholehearted devotion. With that, Nathan set to work on the first wounded shinobi. Beside him, Shisui moved off to one side, settled into a cross-legged meditation, and began drawing chakra through his limbs with fierce concentration. Each breath he took seemed to pull more energy from his reserves, refining it until it pulsed between his palms. Minutes stretched on, then turned into nearly an hour of steady effort. At last, thanks to Nathan's skilled medical chakra application and Shisui's tireless energy support, all 24 survivors of the Konoha squad had been treated. Their wounds were far from fully healed, but they were stable and fit enough to march on without risking collapse. As soon as the last shinobi rose to his feet, Nathan and Shisui fell in step at the front of the group. There was no time to lose. Together, they set off once more, pressing forward toward their next objective. Nathan wasn't itching for another fight, he just wanted to get out of there. Sure, they'd wiped out the bulk of the incoming fog shinobi, and the rest had fled into the mist, but that didn't guarantee the enemy wouldn't regroup and strike back. He wasn't personally intimidated by their current numbers, but if they called in reinforcements and launched a second wave, things could turn deadly in an instant. Even if that scenario seemed unlikely, Nathan refused to gamble with his teammates' lives. Worse still was the specter of Danzo. Nathan had already eliminated Ryoma Aburami's squad and sifted through their stolen memories, confirming that no other units were involved in this mission, at least for now. In theory, Danzo would need a day or two to piece together what had happened. But why wait and cross their fingers? As the saying went, you never lose if you don't play. If there was any chance of enemy traps or reinforcements, they needed to withdraw immediately and on their own terms. That urgency explained why Nathan had poured so much chakra into healing the wounded Konoha shinobi. Expensive and draining as it was a small price to pay for a swift, organized retreat, one that would leave them ready to face whatever tricks Danzo might have up his sleeve. Despite the extra training bonus, Nathan still hadn't pushed his mastery of the Palm Fairy technique past level 7. Until he broke through to level 8, his body couldn't trigger the next accelerated transformation. He was tantalizingly close, though. Once he reached his destination, he estimated it would take only a day for the technique to ascend. Reaching level 8 would dramatically amplify the Palm Fairy technique's ability to strengthen his body. With that upgrade, he could fully replenish his foundational reserves in about a week and then undergo a fresh transformation. His physique attribute would climb, boosting 2 key aspects, his innate potential and his body's stress tolerance. The potential was already rising. He simply needed to let it mature. The improved stress tolerance was even more critical. It would lower the physical cost of using the Mangekyo Sharingan so long as he avoided overexertion and thereby delay the dreaded blindness curse. That advantage could make all the difference for him. For now, these were only Nathan's educated guesses. The real results would depend on how much his physique actually improved. He shook his head to clear away the doubts, refocused his thoughts, and pressed on, leading the team forward. Chapter 300, Reception. Dawn broke as the moon dipped below the horizon. In a matter of hours, the sky had shifted from inky black to a soft, rosy glow. Nathan led his squad eastward, the new sun at their backs. Suddenly, he halted mid-step and raised his right hand in a swift signal for everyone to stop. The team froze, instinctively crouching into alert stances. After a moment, Uchiha Shisui, who'd been covering their rear guard, pushed through the formation and bowed slightly. "What is it, Nathan?" Nathan shook his head slowly. "I'm picking up someone, ahead of us." His voice carried a thread of uncertainty. Even though Nathan's Manjikyo Sharingan had vastly heightened his mental awareness, he'd never truly mastered sensory ninjutsu. He could detect Aburame Ryoma's subtle insect spies at close range, but beyond that, his perception grew hazy. Right now, he only had the faintest hint that an unseen shinobi was approaching, no clue whether it was one enemy or several, or exactly where they were hiding. He couldn't help but miss the Hyuga clan's special jonin from his old team. With her Byakugan, she would have spotted their adversary in an instant and revealed every detail. Nathan sighed inwardly. Lacking that advantage, he'd have to rely on his Sharingan and the sharp senses of his comrades to stay one step ahead. Nathan stared at the battlefield where Hinata Hika had fallen. As a Hyuga clan shinobi, her Byakugan should have given her the edge, but when she was discovered, several Kirigakure special jonin closed in and cut her down before she could react. Now the team had only one sensory ninja left, and his range was nowhere near what Hinata's was. Nathan shook his head in frustration. Uchiha Shisui didn't know what Nathan was thinking, but he sensed something was wrong. At Nathan's mention of an unexpected threat, Shisui's eyes widened. "Mist ninjas?" he asked in a low voice. Or, he trailed off when he realized others were within earshot, but Nathan understood exactly what he meant. Earlier, he'd quietly told Shisui about Aburame Ryoma and the rest, without revealing too many details, explaining that he'd uncovered several suspected Root operatives and eliminated them. Shisui had pressed for more information. Were these enemies leftover agents from Root? Nathan shook his head. It couldn't be. He'd seen Ryoma's memories himself. Their squad had been the only team sent on this mission. There were no other hidden threats waiting in the fog. Except for the hidden mist spy Faceless, Nathan has cut down every last enemy. The clearing sits empty now, no more threats in sight. Yet Nathan can't shake the suspicion that reinforcements might be coming. But which force could have responded so swiftly? The Root wouldn't move that fast. Even if they'd intercepted word of this mission, they couldn't have mobilized troops on such short notice, unless Danzo had secretly pre-deployed a second team from the start. But that's highly unlikely. With Aburame Ryoma operating under Shisui's watchful eye, any clandestine order would have been exposed. No, these unknown soldiers must belong to some other faction. Friend or foe, Nathan can't yet tell. He needs answers. He turned to Uchiha Shisui. "You and the others hold this spot," he said. "I'm returning to base to find out who's coming our way." Shisui opened his mouth as if to argue. This was dangerous. They needed Nathan here, but the weight of Nathan's seniority and experience stilled his words. Nodding, he fell into formation behind the others, eyes scanning the tree line, while Nathan melted into the shadows on his way back. Nathan nodded once. "Be careful. Got it." Without another word, he surged forward, leaping into the dense forest. In moments, he'd vanished among the trees. Captain Uchiha Shisui watched Nathan's retreating figure for a heartbeat, then turned to his squad. "Spread out and stay alert." "Yes, Captain," the 20 Konoha shinobi answered in unison, fanning out until not a soul remained in sight, at least on the surface. Elsewhere, Nathan pressed on. The moment meant he'd put distance between himself and the team. He picked up his pace, tracking the chakra signature that had drawn him here. His growing strength emboldened him. Caution remained, but fear had no place in his heart. In under 2 minutes, he arrived at his destination. To his surprise, the group waiting ahead were unmistakably Konoha ninja, led by a jonin whose flak jacket bore the Uchiha clan crest on the shoulders. Nathan's sudden appearance betrayed his presence. He'd let a wisp of chakra slip. "Who's there?" the Uchiha Jonin called, hand already twitching toward his weapon. Nathan froze, realizing the element of surprise was lost, and that his mission had just grown infinitely more dangerous. I watched him activate his Sharingan in the blink of an eye, and then a volley of kunai sailed toward me. I drew my dagger as swiftly, metal ringing against metal as I deflected the blades aside. At the same moment, I opened my own Sharingan. Among Uchiha Shinobi, revealing the dojutsu is all it takes to prove your identity. The moment they recognized my eyes, his men froze. Seizing the opening, I slipped past them and stood before their leader. He peered at me intently, then asked, "Are you Uchiha Nathan?" His question caught me off guard. Me? Famous enough to be identified just by my eyes? Before I could reply, he smiled and offered his own name. "I'm Uchiha Yashiro," he said. "By clan seniority, that makes me your uncle." A few days ago, Elder Uchiha Huoshuan sent word, "Nathan, come to us, we'll take care of you." Nathan paused, remembering Huoshuan's promise on the Kirigakure battlefield that someone would watch over him. It wasn't idle talk, it seemed, but he pushed that thought aside for the moment and studied the man before him and the guards behind him. "Uncle, what's going on?" Uchiha Yashiro's face darkened. "I just received word that a team of elite Kirigakure shinobi broke through our northern defenses. Their route intersected with yours, so I led a squad out to intercept them. I'm relieved to see you're safe. If you'd crossed paths, the outcome could have been disastrous. By the way, wasn't Shisui traveling with you? Where is he?" At that question, Nathan's expression went blank. Nathan didn't hesitate. He laid it all out. How he and the others had been ambushed by mist shinobi, the desperate fight that followed, and their narrow escape. At once, Uchiha Yashiro's composure cracked. "What? You ran into those mist ninjas and got ambushed? How did you break free? And where are the rest of your team?" The Konoha shinobi arrayed behind Yashiro stiffened, eyes darting into the trees as if expecting another attack at any moment. Realizing they feared a renewed assault, Nathan pressed on, filling in every detail of their encounter. When he finished, Yashiro stood silent for a long moment, then shook his head in astonishment. "You actually drove them off? How is that even possible?" Nathan gave a measured nod. "I'll explain the tactics later. Right now, our missing comrades are hiding just beyond that ridge. We should link up with them first." Yashiro took a steadying breath and inclined his head. "You're right. Let's make contact." With that, Yashiro fell in beside Nathan. The group moved swiftly and quietly through the underbrush, following Nathan toward the hidden position where Uchiha Shisui and the rest of their squad lay in wait. Nevertheless, Nathan could tell they still regarded him with caution. He paid it no mind, confident that once both sides had come to an agreement, their guard would finally come down.